I'll take her case. The words echoed through the marble courthouse like a thunderclap, silencing 200 people in an instant. Every head turned toward the back of the room, not toward the polished attorneys in their $1,000 suits, but toward a man in work boots covered in sawdust, holding a hammer in one calloused hand. Lucas Reed, the courthouse janitor, had just done something impossible. He'd stepped into a billion-dollar legal battle that would destroy careers, expose corporate corruption, and force him to face the life he'd abandoned years ago. But before we dive into how a carpenter became the most unlikely hero in legal history, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Henderson County Courthouse had witnessed 1,000 dramas, but nothing quite prepared its walls for what was about to unfold on that humid Tuesday morning in June. Lucas Reed knelt beside the witness stand in courtroom 6, running his hand along a crack in the oak paneling. The wood was splitting, old age and cheap repairs catching up with craftsmanship from another era. He'd noticed it 3 days ago while mopping and had finally gotten permission from Judge Margaret Chen to fix it properly. The courtroom was supposed to be empty this morning, scheduled for renovations, but plans had changed overnight. Now the room hummed with expensive cologne, leather briefcases, and the particular tension that comes when millions of dollars hang in the balance. Lucas worked quietly, the way he always did, trying to become invisible. He'd learned that skill over the past 6 years, how to occupy space without demanding attention, how to exist in rooms full of important people without them really seeing him. It was a different kind of power than he'd once wielded, but it served its purpose. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Lucas started to stand, then remembered he wasn't there as an observer. He was there to work. He stayed kneeling, making himself smaller, his hands still on the witness stand he was repairing. Judge Chen entered, her black robe sweeping behind her, her expression already showing signs of the headache this case was giving her. She was in her mid-50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for running her courtroom with precision and fairness. Lucas had cleaned her chambers dozens of times. She'd always been kind to him, treating him like a person rather than furniture. "Be seated," Judge Chen said, settling behind her bench. Her gaze flickered to Lucas, a moment of surprise crossing her features. She'd clearly forgotten he'd be there. "Mr. Reed, how much longer on those repairs?" Lucas glanced at the crack, then at the crowd filling the gallery. 10 minutes, Your Honor. I can come back." No, we're already behind schedule." She waved a hand. "Just work quietly." "Yes, ma'am." Lucas bent back to his task, but his attention was now divided. He couldn't help but absorb the scene unfolding around him. Years of training didn't just disappear, even when you tried to bury them under sawdust and silence. The plaintiff's table was a show of force. 4 attorneys in matching Navy suits, all from Whitmore and Associates, one of the largest corporate firms in the state. Their lead counsel, Richard Hale, was a legend. 63 years old, silver-haired, with a record of victories that read like a greatest hits album of corporate warfare. Lucas had studied his cases once, in another life. The man was brilliant and utterly ruthless. Behind them sat representatives from Meridian Solutions, a corporation that specialized in water purification technology. Their CEO, James Thornton, looked like Central Casting's idea of a corporate villain: cold eyes, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never reached beyond his teeth. The defendant's table told a different story. Evelyn Moore sat alone. Well, not quite alone. There was an empty chair beside her where her attorney should have been, and a young paralegal who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else, but essentially alone. Lucas had seen Evelyn around the courthouse before. Hard not to notice her. She was in her late 30s, with dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, dressed in clothes that suggested wealth but prioritized function over fashion. Her company, Aquaverde Technologies, had made headlines 3 years ago when she developed a revolutionary water filtration system that could provide clean drinking water at a fraction of the usual cost. She'd been on magazine covers, given TED Talks, pledged to bring clean water to communities that had never had reliable access. Now she was being sued for theft of intellectual property, fraud, and breach of contract, claims that, if successful, would not only bankrupt her company but potentially send her to prison. Lucas positioned his chisel against the damaged wood, but his hands had gone still. Something was wrong. The energy in the room felt off, like a storm building just before it broke. Judge Chen shuffled papers, her frown deepening. Counselor Brighton was supposed to be here representing Ms. Moore. Can someone explain his absence? The young paralegal stood, her hands shaking slightly. Your Honor, I'm trying to reach him. He's not answering his phone. Not answering? Judge Chen's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet that meant she was genuinely angry. This hearing is scheduled to begin in 3 minutes. I know, Your Honor, I apologize. He was supposed to meet me here at 8. I don't know where he is. Richard Hale rose, moving with the confidence of a man who'd never lost when it mattered. Your Honor, if I may, perhaps Mr. Brighton has realized the untenable position his client is in. The evidence against Ms. Moore is overwhelming. Her so-called revolutionary technology is built on intellectual property stolen from my clients. Every delay simply, I'll decide what's overwhelming, Mr. Hale. Judge Chen cut him off. Sit down. Hale sat, but his slight smile suggested he was perfectly content with how things were going. Lucas watched Evelyn. She sat perfectly still, her jaw tight, her hands clasped on the table in front of her. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her knuckles had gone white. This wasn't just about money for her. He recognized that look. He'd worn it himself once. The courtroom doors opened, and everyone turned. Hope flickered on the paralegal's face, died just as quickly. It wasn't the missing attorney, just a court reporter hurrying to her station. Judge Chen removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose. Ms. Carter, correct? You're Mr. Brighton's paralegal? Yes, Your Honor. Call him again. Now. The young woman fumbled with her phone, stepped away from the table. The courtroom fell into uncomfortable silence, broken only by the whispered conversations among the spectators and the soft sound of Lucas's chisel work, though he'd stopped actually cutting, just maintaining the pretense. A minute passed. 2. Ms. Carter returned to the table, her face pale. Your Honor, he's not picking up, but I checked my email. He sent something at 6 this morning. And? He's withdrawing from the case, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the sudden rustle of reporters grabbing their phones. Richard Hale didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. Judge Chen's gavel came down hard. Order! I will have order. She waited until the room settled, then turned her sharp gaze on the paralegal. Did Mr. Brighton provide a reason for this abandonment? The email just says irreconcilable differences with the client and concerns about the viability of the defense. Ms. Carter's voice was barely above a whisper. Did Miss Moore know about this? Evelyn stood, her voice steady despite the chaos. No, Your Honor. I spoke with Mr. Brighton yesterday afternoon. He gave no indication he intended to withdraw. In fact, we were reviewing our witness list for today's hearing. Lucas found himself leaning forward slightly, watching her face. There was anger there, yes, but also something else. A kind of tired recognition, as if this betrayal was disappointing but not surprising. Judge Chen's expression had gone from annoyed to genuinely concerned. Miss Moore, do you have other counsel who can step in? Not immediately, Your Honor. Mr. Brighton has been representing me for 8 months. No one else is familiar with the case details. Your Honor, Richard Hale stood again, his voice dripping with false sympathy. While I understand this is unfortunate for Ms. Moore, the plaintiff cannot be held hostage to the defendant's inability to retain counsel. We've prepared extensively for today's hearing. My clients have lost significant revenue due to Ms. Moore's theft of their intellectual property. Every day of delay costs them. Spare me the theatrics, Mr. Hale. I'm well aware of what's at stake. Judge Chen turned back to Evelyn. Ms. Moore, I'm sympathetic to your situation, but Mr. Hale has a point. This hearing has been scheduled for 3 months. Multiple continuances have already been granted. I cannot simply... I understand, Your Honor. Evelyn's voice remained calm, but Lucas could hear the strain underneath. I'm not asking for sympathy, I'm asking for fairness. My attorney abandoned me less than 2 hours before a critical hearing. I need time to find new representation. How much time? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Hale practically exploded from his chair. 3 weeks? Your Honor, this is clearly a delaying tactic. Ms. Moore has been scrambling to avoid facing the evidence against her since... Mr. Hale, I swear I will hold you in contempt if you interrupt me one more time. Judge Chen's voice could have cut glass. She turned back to Evelyn. Miss Moore, I'm going to be frank with you. Your attorney's withdrawal, the timing, the reasons cited, it doesn't look good. It suggests that someone familiar with your case has concluded it cannot be won. Or that someone got to him, Evelyn said quietly. The courtroom went silent. That's a serious accusation, Judge Chen said. Do you have evidence? Not yet. But Mr. Brighton's withdrawal comes exactly 12 hours after Meridian Solutions made their final settlement offer. An offer that would require me to surrender all rights to my technology and sign in an NDA, preventing me from ever working in water purification again. When I refused, I was told I'd regret it. Lucas's hands had stopped moving entirely now. He was staring at Evelyn, pieces clicking together in his mind. He'd read about this case in the local papers, but the coverage had been surface level. The story was more complicated than he'd realized. Richard Hale's smile had vanished. Your Honor, these conspiracy theories are exactly the kind of desperate deflection we've come to expect from Miss Moore. My clients made a generous settlement offer to avoid costly litigation. She refused. That's her right. But to suggest that— I'm not suggesting anything, Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. I'm stating facts. Meridian Solutions wants my technology. They can't replicate it themselves, so they're using lawsuits and intimidation to take it. And apparently they've gotten to my attorney. Enough. Judge Chen's gavel came down again. Ms. Moore, unless you can provide proof of these allegations, I cannot consider them. What I can consider is that you are currently unrepresented, that today's hearing is critical to the progression of this case, and that the plaintiff has a right to timely resolution. Lucas watched Evelyn's shoulders sag slightly. She knew what was coming. I'm going to grant a 1-week continuance, Judge Chen said. That gives you 7 days to find new counsel. If you cannot secure representation by then, we will proceed with you representing yourself pro se. I don't recommend that course of action, but it's your right. Your Honor, 1 week is not nearly enough time, Evelyn started. 1 week is what I'm giving you. This case has already consumed 8 months. I will not allow it to drag on indefinitely. Judge Chen gathered her papers. We'll reconvene next Tuesday at 9 a.m. I expect everyone to be— I'll take her case. The words were out of Lucas's mouth before his brain caught up with them. He hadn't planned to speak, hadn't even consciously decided to speak. But suddenly he was standing, the chisel still in his hand, sawdust on his worn jeans, facing a courtroom full of stunned faces. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Judge Chen turned slowly to look at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. I'm sorry, what did you say? Lucas set down his chisel carefully. His heart was hammering, but his voice came out steady, years of courtroom work, muscle memory kicking in. I said I'll take her case, Your Honor, if Ms. Moore will have me as her attorney. The courtroom exploded into chaos for the second time in 5 minutes. People were standing, talking over each other, reporters practically climbing over seats to get closer. The bailiff moved forward instinctively, as if Lucas might be some kind of threat. Judge Chen's gavel came down repeatedly. Order, order in this court. She fixed Lucas with a stare that could melt steel. Mr. Reed, you are the courthouse janitor. You are here to repair that witness stand, not to practice law. Sit down and return to your work. With respect, Your Honor, I'm also a licensed attorney in this state. Lucas reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, extracted a card he'd carried for 6 years without ever expecting to use again. He walked forward, aware of every eye in the room tracking his movement, and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Chen. She examined it, her frown deepening. This license is inactive. Inactive, yes, but not revoked or suspended. I can reactivate it by filing paperwork and paying the fee. The process takes less than an hour online. You're a carpenter, Richard Hale said, standing. His voice dripped with contempt. You repair furniture and mop floors. I'm a carpenter who used to practice law, Lucas corrected, meeting Hale's eyes. I took a leave of absence 6 years ago for personal reasons, but my legal education and experience didn't disappear. Judge Chen was studying him now with different eyes, and Lucas could see the moment recognition hit. Wait. Lucas Reed. You're that Lucas Reed? You worked for Blackwell and Associates. You defended that pharmaceutical case, the Bennett version North Star litigation. Yes, Your Honor. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The Bennett case had been major news 7 years ago, a class action lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company accused of hiding dangerous side effects. Lucas had been part of the defense team, a rising star being groomed for partner. They'd won, though the victory had been complicated in ways the public never knew. Richard Hale's expression had shifted from contempt to something more calculating. I remember that case, that. You were Blackwell's golden boy. Then you vanished. Rumor was you couldn't handle the pressure. Lucas felt the old anger flicker, pushed it down. Rumor was wrong. I left for personal reasons that I'm not going to discuss in open court. But you've been working as a janitor, Hale pressed, a carpenter, for 6 years. You expect us to believe you're prepared to jump back into litigation in a case this complex? I expect you to respect the fact that Miss Moore has the right to choose her own attorney. Whether that's me or someone else is her decision, not yours. Lucas turned to Evelyn. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but also something that looked like hope mixed with skepticism. Ms. Moore, Judge Chen said, are you seriously considering this? Evelyn stood slowly. Your Honor, may I have a moment to speak with Mr. Reed privately? You may not. If you're going to make this decision, make it now. I'm not continuing this circus. Evelyn looked at Lucas for a long moment. He could see her weighing impossible options. A janitor turned carpenter who claimed to be a lawyer versus representing herself against one of the most powerful corporate firms in the state versus trying to find new counsel in 7 days when her previous attorney had just publicly declared her case unwinnable. What kind of law did you practice? She asked. Corporate litigation, contract disputes, intellectual property, corporate governance. How long? 5 years at Blackwell and Associates. Before that, 2 years as a public defender. Why did you leave? The question hung in the air. Lucas could feel everyone waiting for his answer. He thought about lying or deflecting or giving the kind of vague non-answer attorneys specialized in. Instead, he told the truth. My wife died in a car accident. I had a 6-year-old daughter who needed her father to be present, not billing 80 hours a week and sleeping in hotel rooms, so I chose her. I don't regret it. Something in Evelyn's face softened. You gave up your career to be a parent. I gave up one career, found another one that let me be both. And now? You have a daughter who still needs you. Why step back into this? That was the real question, wasn't it? Lucas had asked himself the same thing in the split second before he'd opened his mouth. Why risk the careful balance he'd built? Why dive back into the world of stress and conflict he'd worked so hard to leave behind? He thought about Nina, 12 years old now, smart and kind, and everything her mother had been. He thought about the conversation they'd had just last week, when she'd asked him why he cleaned buildings instead of being a lawyer like he used to be. Because you wanted to be with me, she'd answered her own question. I know, Dad, and I'm glad you did, but I'm not 6 anymore. And sometimes I think you gave up something you loved because you thought you had to choose. Maybe you don't have to choose anymore. Lucas looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, and saw something he recognized, someone fighting for something that mattered, being crushed by people with more power and fewer scruples. He'd walked away from that world because it had cost him too much, but maybe walking away didn't have to be permanent. Because, he said finally, I heard what you said about Meridian Solutions trying to take your technology, about them trying to force you into silence. I spent 5 years defending corporations that did exactly that kind of thing. I was good at it, maybe too good. When I walked away, I told myself I was done with that world. But watching you sit there alone, facing people who are trying to destroy something you built to help people, I can't just stand by and do nothing. You don't know me, Evelyn said. You don't know my case. For all you know, everything they're saying about me is true. Is it? No. Then that's all I need to know. Richard Hale laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Your Honor, this is absurd. A carpenter who hasn't practiced law in 6 years wants to defend against charges of intellectual property theft, fraud, and breach of contract. He'll be slaughtered. This isn't kindness, it's professional suicide. and it's setting Ms. Moore up for an even worse fall. Maybe, Lucas said, or maybe I remember how to do this better than you think. Your Honor, Hale continued, I move that you reject this arrangement. Mr. Reed is clearly not prepared to offer competent representation. Allowing him to proceed would be a disservice to justice itself. Judge Chen had been silent through this exchange, her expression unreadable. Now she leaned forward, looking from Lucas to Evelyn and back again. Mr. Reed, I'm going to be blunt with you. Mr. Hale is right. You're rusty. You'll be facing one of the best corporate litigators in the state, backed by unlimited resources. Even if you reactivate your license today, you'll have less than a week to familiarize yourself with 8 months of case history, depositions, evidence, and motions. The odds of you providing effective counsel are minimal. I understand, Your Honor. Do you? Because if you fail, and statistically you will fail, Ms. Moore doesn't just lose a lawsuit. She loses her company, her reputation, possibly her freedom. This isn't a game. This isn't a feel-good story where the underdog wins through determination. This is people's lives. Lucas held her gaze. I know what's at stake. I also know that Miss Moore's options are represent herself, find an attorney willing to take her case in 7 days, or accept me. Given those choices, I'm offering her the best chance she has. The best chance? Hale's voice was full of scorn. You're offering her a spectacle, a circus act. The janitor playing lawyer. It'll make great headlines, I'm sure. But when we destroy you, and we will destroy you, what will that accomplish except humiliating both of you? Then you should be happy, Lucas said calmly. If I'm such an easy target, you should be thrilled that Miss Moore is choosing me over more competent counsel. That landed. Hale's jaw tightened, and Lucas saw the calculation in his eyes. If he continued to argue against Lucas's representation, it would look like he was afraid. But if he accepted it, he was agreeing that a carpenter-janitor was a legitimate opponent. Judge Chen was watching this exchange with interest. Miss Moore, this is your decision, but I want you to think very carefully before you make it. Mr. Reed's offer is unconventional. It's also risky. You have other options. Do I? Evelyn asked. Your Honor, with respect, what are my real options here? Represent myself, knowing I have no legal training and will be torn apart by Mr. Hale's team? Spend the next 7 days desperately calling attorneys, most of whom will refuse to take a case that my previous lawyer has publicly declared unwinnable, or accept the help of someone who actually knows law, who has experience in exactly the kind of litigation I'm facing. He hasn't practiced in 6 years, Judge Chen reminded her, and Mr. Brighton had been practicing continuously, and he abandoned me this morning. Evelyn turned to face Lucas fully. Mr. Reed, I don't know you. I don't know if you're really as capable as you claim, but I know that Meridian Solutions has spent 8 months trying to intimidate me, bankrupt me, and steal my life's work. I know my attorney walked away precisely when I needed him most, and I know that you just stood up in a room full of people and offered to help when you had absolutely nothing to gain from it. So yes, if you're serious about this, I accept your representation. The courtroom burst into noise again, reporters typing furiously, spectators murmuring, Hale's legal team conferring in urgent whispers. Lucas felt the weight of what he'd just committed to settling onto his shoulders. It was familiar and terrifying in equal measure. Judge Chen raised her hand and the room gradually quieted. Very well, Mr. Reed, you have until end of business today to reactivate your license and file the appropriate paperwork with the court indicating you are Ms. Moore's counsel of record. If those documents aren't filed by 5 p.m., this agreement is void. Understood? Yes, Your Honor. The hearing is rescheduled for next Tuesday, 9 a.m. Both parties will be prepared to present arguments on Meridian Solutions' motion for summary judgment. Mr. Reed, I suggest you spend the next 7 days reviewing everything you can about this case, because I will hold you to the same standards I hold Mr. Hale. I wouldn't expect anything less. One more thing. Judge Chen's voice dropped, became almost gentle. I remember you from before, Mr. Reed. You were talented. You had a bright future. I don't know exactly why you left or what you've been doing for 6 years, but I hope you understand what you're walking back into. This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is, Your Honor. Judge Chen nodded slowly, then raised her gavel. This hearing is continued to Tuesday, June 27th at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. People began gathering their things, standing, talking. Lucas felt frozen for a moment, the reality of what he'd done crashing over him like a wave. Then Evelyn was beside him, her hand extended. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that. Even if this all goes wrong, thank you for standing up." Lucas shook her hand. "Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work to do." "I know. When can we start?" "How about now? I need to finish fixing this witness stand, file my paperwork, and then we should sit down and you can walk me through everything, the case, the technology, what really happened with Meridian. I have files in my car, boxes of them, everything Brighton had." "Good. We're going to need all of it." Lucas paused. "Miss Moore, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I think we'll definitely win. The odds are against us. But I am doing this because I think you deserve a real defense, and because sometimes standing up is more important than winning." "I'll take that," Evelyn said. "And call me Evelyn." "Lucas." They shook again, a proper introduction this time. Behind them, Richard Hale was packing his briefcase, surrounded by his team. He caught Lucas's eye and smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the smile of a predator who'd just spotted easy prey. "Mr. Reed," Hale called out, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "A word?" Lucas walked over, aware of Evelyn following a step behind. Up close, Richard Hale was even more imposing. Tall, perfectly groomed, exuding the confidence of 3 decades of victories. "That was quite a performance," Hale said. "Very dramatic. The janitor becomes a lawyer. I'm sure the press will love it." "This isn't about press." "No? Then what is it about? Recapturing past glory? Proving something to yourself?" Hale's smile widened. "Or maybe you actually believe you can win. Maybe I just believe in giving people a fair fight." "How noble." Hale's tone made it clear he thought nobility was a weakness. "Let me give you some free advice, counselor to counselor. Walk away from this. Ms. Moore's case is dead in the water. The evidence against her is overwhelming. Her attorney knew it, which is why he withdrew. By taking this case, all you're going to do is humiliate yourself and damage what little reputation you have left. If the evidence is so overwhelming, why are you worried about who represents her?" "I'm not worried. I'm being courteous. I remember you from before. You had talent. I'd hate to see you throw away whatever you've built in these past years for a lost cause." Lucas studied Hale's face, looking for any crack in the polished veneer. There wasn't one. This was a man completely comfortable with his power, utterly confident in his victory. "I appreciate the concern," Lucas said, "but I'm good. Your choice. But when this is over, don't say I didn't warn you." Hale picked up his briefcase. "See you next Tuesday, Mr. Reed. Try to dress appropriately for court. Those work boots really aren't suitable." He walked away, his team following like ducklings behind their mother. The courtroom was emptying now, people filing out, still talking about what they'd witnessed. Lucas became aware of someone standing nearby, the young paralegal who'd been abandoned along with Evelyn. "Mr. Carter, right?" he said. She nodded, looking miserable. "I'm so sorry about all this. I had no idea Mr. Brighton was going to withdraw. If I'd known, I would have—" "It's not your fault," Evelyn said gently. "You didn't know. I still feel terrible." She hesitated. "Look, I probably shouldn't do this, but I've been working on this case for months. I know all the files, all the depositions. I know where everything is. Mr. Brighton took his name off, but he didn't take me off. If you need help organizing materials or finding documents, I'm still officially assigned as paralegal support." Lucas felt a surge of gratitude. "That would be incredibly helpful. Are you sure you want to risk it? Helping us won't make you popular with your firm." Miss Carter gave a small, bitter laugh. "Mr. Reed, they had me working 80-hour weeks for 8 months, then left me to clean up their mess this morning without warning. I don't care about being popular. I care about doing the right thing. Plus," she added with a slight smile, "I actually believe in Evelyn's technology. What she's trying to do matters." "Thank you, Sarah," Evelyn said. "That means more than you know." The 3 of them stood there for a moment, an unlikely team formed in chaos, a billionaire entrepreneur, a paralegal who'd been abandoned by her boss, and a carpenter who used to be a lawyer. Lucas thought about his daughter, about the phone call he'd need to make, about the 7 days of intense work ahead of them. But mostly, he thought about the feeling in his chest, the spark of something he hadn't felt in 6 years. Purpose. Direction. The sense that he was exactly where he needed to be, even if where he needed to be was terrifying. "All right," he said. "First things first, let me finish that witness stand, professionally this time, and file my paperwork. Then we meet. Where's good?" "My office," Evelyn said. "It's 20 minutes from here. We have a conference room and Sarah's right. There are boxes of files we'll need to go through." "Perfect. Give me 2 hours. I need to handle the legal stuff and make a phone call." "Your daughter?" Evelyn asked. Lucas nodded. "She'll be getting out of school soon. I need to tell her I'm going to be working late. A lot of late nights, actually." "Will she be okay with that?" "She'll understand. She always does." He paused. "I should warn you both. I'm going to need to brush up on a lot. It's been a while. I might not remember everything immediately." "None of us are perfect," Evelyn said. "We'll figure it out together." Sarah nodded agreement. "Besides, Mr. Hale's team might have more people and resources, but we have something they don't." "What's that?" Lucas asked. "We actually care about the truth." It was naive, maybe. In the world of corporate litigation, truth was often less important than presentation, than strategy, than who had the better lawyers and deeper pockets. But standing there in the emptying courtroom, looking at two women who were choosing to fight despite impossible odds, Lucas found himself believing it. Maybe caring about the truth mattered. Maybe it was enough. He'd find out soon enough. Judge Chen's clerk appeared at the bench, beginning to organize papers for the next case. Lucas grabbed his toolbox, finished the last few cuts on the witness stand repair, and tested the wood. Solid now, stronger than it had been before. He looked at the stand for a moment, thinking about metaphors, about things that looked broken but could be fixed with the right tools and enough care, about cracks that made things more interesting, not less valuable. 2 hours, he said to Evelyn and Sarah. "I'll see you then." He walked out of courtroom 6 through the marble halls of the Henderson County Courthouse, past the security station where the guards knew him by name because he'd fixed the door to their break room last month, past the administrative offices where he'd repaired desks and shelves and filing cabinets, out into the June heat, where he pulled out his phone and called his daughter. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, how's work?" "Hey, Nina Bean, work's good. Actually, something happened today, something unexpected. You busy after school?" "Just homework. Why?" "I need to tell you something, and I want to hear what you think about it." "That sounds ominous. Good ominous or bad ominous?" Lucas smiled, despite himself. 12 years old, and already she could read him perfectly. "Honestly, I'm not sure yet, but I think it might be good. Different, anyway." "Okay, want to meet at Giuseppe's? I could go for pizza." "Giuseppe's at 4. My treat." "Everything's your treat, Dad. You're the adult." "Fair point. See you at 4. Love you." "Love you too." He hung up, stood in the courthouse parking lot for a moment, and looked up at the building. 6 years he'd worked here. 6 years of fixing things, cleaning things, being invisible. 6 years of careful, deliberate peace. Now he was about to disrupt that peace entirely. Lucas thought about Richard Hale's confidence, about the mountain of evidence he'd need to review, about facing down a team of corporate lawyers with unlimited resources when he was rusty and unpracticed and working with a client everyone assumed was guilty. Then he thought about Evelyn's face when her attorney abandoned her, about the way she'd sat there alone, and about the words she'd said. "Meridian Solutions wants my technology. They can't replicate it, so they're using lawsuits and intimidation to take it." He defended corporations like Meridian for 5 years. He knew their playbook. He'd written parts of their playbook. Maybe it was time to use that knowledge differently. Lucas got in his truck, the same beat-up Ford he'd bought when he'd decided to become a carpenter, and drove to the courthouse administrative building. Inside, he found a quiet computer terminal and pulled up the State Bar website. The reactivation process was exactly as he'd remembered. Fill out forms, attest that you haven't been convicted of any crimes or engaged in unethical conduct, pay the fee, submit. His hands moved across the keyboard with muscle memory, typing information he'd thought he'd never use again. Full legal name, Lucas James Reed. Bar number 43789. Status, Inactive, voluntary. Reason for reactivation, resuming practice. The cursor blinked at him. One more click and he'd be a lawyer again, officially. One more click and 7 days of intense work awaited him. One more click and he was committed. Lucas thought about Nina, about the life they'd built, about the balance he'd fought so hard to maintain. Then he clicked submit. The screen confirmed. Status updated to active. Welcome back to the practice of law. Lucas Reed, carpenter and courthouse janitor, was officially a lawyer once more. Now came the hard part, remembering how to be good at it. Giuseppe's Pizza had been Lucas and Nina's tradition since she was 7 years old. Every Friday, sometimes more often when life got complicated or celebrated. The red vinyl booths, the smell of oregano and baking dough, the jukebox in the corner that still played actual records. It was their place, where big conversations happened over pepperoni and root beer. Nina was already in their usual booth when Lucas arrived, her backpack on the seat beside her, math homework spread across the table. She looked up when he walked in and her smile faltered slightly. She could read him too well. "Okay," she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "What happened?" Lucas signaled to Maria, the owner, who already knew their order by heart. Then he looked at his daughter, dark hair like her mother's, gray eyes like his own, that particular expression of patient curiosity that meant she was ready to listen to whatever he needed to say. "You remember when you asked me last week why I don't practice law anymore? And you said it was because you wanted to be around more for me." Which I already knew. Nina closed her math book, giving him her full attention. "Did something change?" "This morning, something happened at the courthouse." Lucas told her about Evelyn Moore, about the abandoned attorney, about the words that had come out of his mouth before he could think better of them. Nina listened without interrupting, the way she always did, her face thoughtful. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Maria brought their usual order, large pepperoni, 2 root beers, and retreated without comment, sensing the seriousness of the conversation. "So you're a lawyer again," Nina said finally. "Just like that." "Not exactly like that. I still do the carpentry and maintenance work. But yes, for this case, I'm representing someone who needs help. The billionaire lady." "Huh?" "The entrepreneur who's being sued by a corporation trying to steal her technology." Nina took a slice of pizza, considered it. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Always." "Did you take this case because you actually think you can win, or because you felt sorry for her?" The question hit harder than Lucas expected. He'd been asking himself the same thing since leaving the courthouse. Both, maybe. She needed someone to stand up for her. But also, Nina, what she's trying to do matters. She developed a system to provide clean water to places that don't have it. And there's a corporation trying to take that away from her because they can't compete with her technology. That's the kind of thing I used to help corporations do. Maybe this is a chance to be on the other side for once. "But you haven't done this in 6 years. You said yourself you're rusty." "I am." "And this Richard Hale guy, you said he's really good." "He is." "So what makes you think you can beat him?" Lucas smiled despite himself. "When did you get so practical?" "I learned from watching you." Nina took a bite of pizza, chewed thoughtfully. "Dad, I want you to do this. I really do. You've been happy as a carpenter, but there's always been this thing, like you gave up part of yourself. I see it sometimes when you're fixing something complicated, like you're solving a puzzle but wishing the puzzle was bigger. And I'm not 6 anymore. I don't need you to walk me to school or help with every homework assignment. I'm 12. I can handle you working late sometimes." "You're sure?" "I'm sure, but I'm also worried. Not about you working late, about you getting hurt. You gave up being a lawyer because of Mom, because you didn't want to lose yourself in work and lose me, too. What if you go back and it's just as bad as before? What if you get so caught up in this that you forget why you left?" Lucas reached across the table, took her hand. "I won't forget. Your mom's death taught me what matters. That hasn't changed. This case is important, but you're more important. If I ever lose sight of that, I trust you to remind me." "Oh, I will," Nina grinned suddenly. "I'll be super annoying about it. Dad, remember what matters. Dad, you're working too much. Dad, we have a standing pizza date and you're not canceling." "Deal." Lucas squeezed her hand. 7 days, Nina. That's all I've got to prepare. It's going to be intense. But after that, win or lose, I'll know I did everything I could for someone who deserved a real defense. Then you'd better get started. Nina pulled her hand back, picked up another slice of pizza. Eat fast. You've got a meeting, right? In an hour. How did you... Dad, you told me the entrepreneur needed help preparing her case. You're not going to wait until tomorrow to start. That's not who you are. She paused. It never was. Lucas looked at his daughter and felt a surge of something between pride and heartbreak. When had she grown up so much? When had she stopped being the 6-year-old who needed him to check for monsters under the bed and become this perceptive, supportive, almost teenager who could read him better than he could read himself? Your mom would be proud of you, he said quietly. She'd be proud of you too, for standing up. They finished their pizza quickly, talking about Nina's day at school, her upcoming science project, the book she was reading. Normal things, anchoring things. Lucas paid the check, hugged his daughter in the parking lot, and watched her bike away toward home before climbing back into his truck. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Office address, 2847 Industrial Parkway, Suite 300. Sarah and I are here whenever you're ready. Take your time. Lucas checked his watch. 4:30. He told them 2 hours, and it had been almost 3. But Nina was right. There was no sense in waiting. 7 days wasn't much time to prepare for a case that had already consumed 8 months of someone else's work. He drove across town to the industrial park, found the building, rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. Aquaverde Technologies occupied a corner suite with glass walls and modern furniture that managed to feel functional rather than showy. Through the windows, he could see people working at computers, examining what looked like water filtration equipment, engaged in intense discussions over blueprints. The receptionist looked up when he entered, her expression moving from polite inquiry to confusion as she took in his work clothes and tool belt. Can I help you? Lucas Reed. I'm here to see Evelyn Moore. Oh. Recognition dawned. You're from the courthouse this morning. I heard about that. Miss Moore said to send you right back when you arrived. Conference room B, down the hall and to the left. Lucas found the conference room easily. It was dominated by a long table currently covered in boxes, file folders, and loose papers. Evelyn and Sarah sat at one end, Sarah typing on a laptop while Evelyn sorted through documents. They both looked up when he entered. Welcome to War Room, Evelyn said with a tired smile. Sorry about the mess. We've been trying to organize 8 months of Brighton's work. It's not well organized. Lucas set his tool belt down by the door, suddenly feeling the weight of what he'd committed to. Where do we start? Sarah gestured to a whiteboard on the wall where she'd written a timeline. I've been trying to create an overview. The lawsuit was filed 8 months ago. Meridian Solutions claims that you, Evelyn, stole their intellectual property when you worked as a consultant for them 3 years ago. They say your Aquaverde filtration system is based on research and designs you had access to during your time there. Which is completely false, Evelyn added. I did consult for them, but I was working on a completely different project. The Aquaverde system is based on research I conducted years before I ever met anyone from Meridian. Lucas pulled out a chair, sat down. Walk me through it. From the beginning. How did you end up consulting for Meridian? Evelyn leaned back, gathering her thoughts. 4 years ago, I was a graduate student at State University, finishing my PhD in environmental engineering. My dissertation focused on low-cost water filtration systems for developing regions. I developed a prototype using a combination of ceramic filtration and UV sterilization that was more efficient and cheaper than anything else on the market. Your Aquaverde system? The foundation of it? Yes. After I graduated, I founded Aquaverde to commercialize the technology. But startups need funding, and I needed industrial partnerships to scale production. Meridian Solutions approached me. They said they were interested in sustainable water technologies, that they wanted to expand into developing markets. It seemed like a perfect fit. Sarah pulled up a document on her laptop. This is the consulting agreement Evelyn signed with Meridian. 6 months, working on improving their existing commercial filtration systems, completely separate from her own research. Lucas scanned the document, his legal training kicking in automatically. This is a standard non-compete in NDA. You agreed not to work for their competitors and not to disclose their proprietary information, but there's no clause here claiming ownership of your prior work. Exactly, Evelyn said. I was careful about that. I even had an attorney review it before I signed. Everything I developed before Meridian was mine. Everything I developed during the consulting period that wasn't directly related to their projects was mine. The agreement was clear. So what happened? Evelyn's expression darkened. I realized pretty quickly that Meridian wasn't actually interested in sustainable water technology for developing regions. They wanted to dominate the commercial market in wealthy countries. Their systems were expensive, proprietary, designed to lock customers into long-term service contracts. When I suggested they could adapt some of my low-cost approaches for humanitarian projects, they laughed at me, said there was no profit in giving away water to poor people. Lucas could see where this was going. You completed your consulting contract and walked away. I fulfilled every obligation. 6 months, delivered exactly what they contracted me for. Then I went back to building Aqua Verde. 2 years later, when my company started getting attention, when we signed deals to provide filtration systems to communities in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, Meridian's lawyers called. Sarah pulled up another document. Initial cease and desist letter claims that Aqua Verde technology violates Meridian's intellectual property rights. Demands that Evelyn cease all operations and turn over all designs and patents. Lucas read through the letter, noting the aggressive language, the vague allegations. Did they specify which IP you supposedly stole? Not at first. They kept it intentionally vague. When I refused to comply, they filed the lawsuit. Evelyn pushed a thick folder across the table. That's their complaint. 300 pages of allegations, technical specifications, and claimed similarities between my system and their proprietary research. Lucas opened the folder, began scanning. The complaint was a masterpiece of aggressive litigation, detailed enough to seem credible, vague enough to be hard to disprove. Meridian claimed that during Evelyn's consulting period, she'd had access to research files, prototype designs, and technical specifications for filtration systems they'd been developing. They alleged that her Aqua Verde system incorporated key elements of that research. The problem, Sarah said, is that some of their claims are technically true. Evelyn did have access to their research files. That was part of the consulting work, and there are surface-level similarities between the systems. Surface level? Lucas looked up. Evelyn nodded. Both systems use ceramic filtration. Both use UV sterilization, but those aren't proprietary technologies. They're standard approaches that have been in use for decades. It's like claiming someone stole your car design because both vehicles have 4 wheels and an engine. The similarities they're pointing to are industry-standard components. What makes your system different? Everything. Evelyn's passion came through clearly now. The innovation isn't in the individual components. It's in how they're integrated, the efficiency of the design, the manufacturing process that makes it affordable. My system can be produced and installed for 1/10 of the cost of Meridian's with comparable or better filtration results. That's what's revolutionary. That's what they can't replicate. Lucas absorbed this, his mind already working through potential arguments. Do you have documentation of your research from before the Meridian consulting period? Lab notes, prototypes, publications? All of it. Evelyn pointed to 3 boxes against the wall. My entire graduate research history, dated lab notebooks, thesis drafts with timestamps, prototype designs, everything proving that the Aqua Verde concept existed before I ever walked into Meridian's offices. That's good. That's the foundation of your defense. Lucas looked at Sarah. What was Brighton's strategy? Sarah's expression soured. Honestly, I'm not sure he had one beyond delay and hope they give up. He filed responses to their motions, but they were defensive. He never went on the offensive, never challenged their fundamental claims. He seemed more interested in negotiating a settlement than actually fighting. Which is exactly what Meridian wanted, Evelyn said bitterly. Drag it out, rack up legal fees, pressure me into surrendering. When I refused their latest settlement offer, Brighton got cold feet, or got paid off. I'm honestly not sure which. Lucas thought about that. Corporate litigation was expensive, deliberately so. Companies like Meridian could afford to spend millions on legal fees. Individual defendants, even wealthy ones, eventually hit their limit. It was a war of attrition, and the corporation almost always won. "How are you funding this?" he asked. "If you don't mind my asking." "Aquaverde is profitable, but not hugely so. Most of our revenue goes back into expanding operations, subsidizing systems for communities that can't afford full price. I've been paying Brighton's firm out of personal savings. It's been," she paused, "unsustainable. Another few months and I would have had to sell the company just to pay legal bills, which is probably what they're counting on." Lucas sat back, thinking. 7 days to prepare for a hearing on summary judgment, a motion that, if granted, would end the case in Meridian's favor without even going to trial. He needed to understand the technical details of both systems, review all the evidence Meridian had presented, prepare counterarguments, possibly find expert witnesses. It was the kind of work that normally took months with a full legal team. He had a week, a paralegal who technically worked for the other side's firm, and legal skills that hadn't been used in 6 years. "All right," he said. "Sarah, can you give me the summary of what's in these boxes?" Sarah consulted her notes. Boxes 1 through 3 are Evelyn's graduate research materials. Boxes 4 through 7 are documents related to the Meridian consulting period, contracts, work product, emails. Boxes 8 through 12 are Meridian's evidence submissions, their technical specifications, claimed similarities, expert witness reports. Boxes 13 through 15 are depositions, Evelyn, former Meridian employees, technical experts on both sides. 15 boxes for 8 months of work? Brighton was thorough in collecting materials, just not thorough in knowing what to do with them. Sarah's tone suggested she'd made that observation before, probably to Brighton himself, probably to no avail. Lucas stood, walked to the boxes, started pulling out folders at random. Years of legal work had taught him how to spot patterns quickly, how to find the narrative thread in chaos. Every case told a story. You just had to figure out what that story was and whether it held together under scrutiny. "What's the hearing on Tuesday actually about?" he asked, reading through a deposition transcript. "Motion for summary judgment," Sarah said. "Meridian is arguing that the evidence is so overwhelmingly in their favor that there's no need for a trial. They want the judge to rule that Evelyn violated their IP rights, award them damages, and grant an injunction preventing Aquaverde from operating." "What are they claiming as damages?" Evelyn's voice was tight. $200 million, plus ownership of all Aquaverde patents and designs. Essentially, they want to take my company and everything I've built. Lucas whistled softly. "That's not just victory. That's annihilation." "That's the point. They don't just want to win, they want to make sure I can never work in this field again. It's a message to anyone else who might try to compete with them." Lucas pulled out another file, found Meridian's expert witness report. Dr. Gerald Hutchison, a professor of engineering with an impressive resume, had reviewed both systems and concluded that the similarities were too extensive to be coincidental and consistent with intellectual property theft. "This expert," Lucas said. "Hutchison. Did Brighton depose him?" "Yes. It's in box 14. Lucas found the deposition, started reading. Hutchison was confident, articulate, and completely convinced that Evelyn had stolen Meridian's work. But as Lucas read deeper, he noticed something. The expert kept referencing general similarities, the use of ceramic filtration, the UV sterilization, the modular design. He never explained why those similarities proved theft rather than just standard engineering practice. "Did Brighton challenge him on the specificity?" Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "Hutchison keeps saying the systems are similar, but he never explains what's uniquely Meridian's. He just lists features that are common in the industry." Lucas flipped through pages. "Did anyone ask him to identify what specific innovations Meridian developed that Evelyn allegedly stole?" "Not directly. Brighton's questioning focused more on Hutchison's credentials and general opinions." Lucas felt a flicker of something, not quite hope, but possibility. "That's a weakness. We can exploit that." He spent the next 3 hours deep in the files, occasionally asking questions, making notes on a legal pad. Evelyn and Sarah ordered dinner from a Chinese place down the street. They ate without really tasting the food, the conference room slowly transforming from a mess of boxes into something more organized as Lucas created piles for different aspects of the case. Around 8 o'clock, Lucas sat back and rubbed his eyes. "Okay, I'm starting to see the shape of this." "And?" Evelyn asked. Meridian's case is built on smoke and mirrors. They're relying on surface-level similarities and expert opinion to create an impression of theft without actually proving specific acts of intellectual property violation. Their strongest evidence is that you worked for them and had access to their research. Their weakest point is that they can't identify any specific proprietary innovation that you stole. Brighton never pushed that angle, Sarah said. No, he stayed defensive, trying to prove Evelyn didn't steal rather than making Meridian prove she did. That's backward. Lucas stood, walked to the whiteboard, started writing. Here's what we need to do. First, we establish a clear timeline showing that Evelyn's core innovations existed before the Meridian consulting period. That undercuts their entire theft narrative. We have that documentation, Evelyn said. Good. Second, we challenge their expert witness. Force him to be specific about what exactly was stolen. When he can't identify unique proprietary elements, his opinion falls apart. Third, we go on offense. We find out what Meridian's actual research looked like during the time Evelyn was consulting. My guess is it was nowhere near as advanced as they're claiming now. Sarah was typing rapidly. That would require discovery from them, documents showing their research status 3 years ago. Did Brighton request that? Some, but Meridian claimed most of it was proprietary and protected. Brighton didn't fight hard enough to get it. Lucas smiled grimly. We're going to fight harder. If they're claiming their research was so advanced that Evelyn stole it, they need to prove that research existed. We'll file a motion to compel production of their lab notes, prototypes, and technical specifications from that time period. That'll take time, Evelyn said. The hearing is in 7 days. The hearing is on their motion for summary judgment. Our job isn't to prove Evelyn's innocence in 7 days. It's to prove that there are genuine disputes of fact that require a trial. If we can show the judge that Meridian's claims aren't as airtight as they pretend, she won't grant summary judgment. That buys us time for a real trial. Evelyn leaned forward. You really think we can do this? Lucas met her eyes. I think we have a shot, a real one. But I need to be honest. The next 7 days are going to be brutal. I need to review everything in these boxes, prepare cross-examination questions, draft responsive pleadings, possibly find our own expert witness to counter Hutchison. That's a lot of work for one person, especially one who's out of practice. Will help, Sarah said immediately. I know these files inside and out. I can pull whatever you need. And I know the technology better than anyone, Evelyn added. I can explain any technical aspect you need to understand. Lucas nodded. Then we have a chance. Sarah, I need you to create a comprehensive timeline, every piece of Evelyn's research, dated and documented, from her graduate work through to the present. Include everything, lab notes, publications, presentations, patents filed. Make it visual. We need to show the judge at a glance that this technology has a clear development path that predates Meridian. I can have that done by tomorrow afternoon. Good. Evelyn, I need you to write up a technical explanation of what makes Aquaverde different from Meridian systems. Not just that they're different, specifically what innovations are yours. Assume the audience is intelligent but not an engineer. How long? However long it takes to be thorough. 5 pages, 10 pages, whatever. But it needs to be airtight. Evelyn nodded. I've been wanting to do that for months. Brighton kept telling me it was too technical, that judges wouldn't understand. But if you're willing to learn the technology, I'm willing to teach it. I'm going to need to understand it anyway if we go to trial. Lucas checked his watch. 9:15. I should get home. Nina's probably wondering if I'm ever coming back. But I'll be here tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., if that works. That works, Evelyn and Sarah said in unison. Lucas gathered his notes, his legal pad now covered in questions and ideas and connections. At the door, he paused. One more thing. Both of you need to think about why you believe Evelyn. Not emotionally, practically. What's the evidence that convinced you she's telling the truth? Sarah, you've worked on this case for months. You've seen all the documents. What made you believe in her innocence? Sarah thought for a moment. The timeline. When you actually look at the dates, Evelyn's research clearly came first. Meridian is trying to claim she stole ideas that she'd already published in academic journals before she ever met them. That's not possible. The only way their case makes sense is if you ignore chronology. Good. Remember that. We're going to make it impossible for anyone to ignore chronology. Lucas looked at Evelyn. What about you? Why should I believe you didn't take shortcuts with Meridian's research? Because I didn't need to. Evelyn's voice was steady. I'm good at what I do, Lucas, really good. I spent years developing this technology because I believed it could help people. I didn't need to steal from Meridian. Their research wasn't even in the same league as mine. The only thing they have that I wanted was manufacturing capacity and funding, and I was willing to walk away from both rather than compromise my principles or my independence. Lucas nodded slowly. That's what we need to show. Not just that you didn't steal, that you didn't need to steal, that you're the innovator, and they're the ones playing catch-up. He left the office, rode the elevator down, walked out into the warm night air. The industrial park was quiet. Most of the other businesses long since closed. He sat in his truck for a moment before starting it, letting the magnitude of what he'd committed to settle over him. 7 years ago, this had been his life. Intense preparation, late nights, the particular stress of high-stakes litigation, he'd been good at it. Too good, maybe. Good enough that he'd lost sight of everything else, until life had forced him to step back and reevaluate. Now he was stepping back in, by choice this time. With his eyes open. His phone buzzed. A text from Nina. Dad, I know you're working, but remember to sleep. Also, I left a sandwich in the fridge for you. Also, you've got this. Lucas smiled, felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. This was different from before. Before, he'd lost himself in work because he didn't know how else to handle grief and responsibility. Now, he had Nina, older, smarter, his anchor and his reminder of what actually mattered. He drove home through empty streets, found Nina already asleep, ate the sandwich she'd left for him, turkey and cheese, his favorite. He sat at the kitchen table for a while, reviewing his notes, making lists of things to research, questions to explore. Tomorrow would be the real work. Tonight, he just needed to remember how to think like a lawyer again. It was like riding a bicycle, supposedly, except this bicycle had been in storage for 6 years, and he was about to ride it in a race against someone who'd never stopped pedaling. Lucas finally went to bed around midnight, set his alarm for 5 a.m., and lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling. In the darkness, he could almost hear his wife's voice. Ellen had always been the practical one, the one who could cut through his overthinking with simple clarity. You're doing the right thing, she would have said. Now stop worrying about whether you can do it and just do it. She'd been good at that, at believing in him even when he didn't believe in himself. Lucas closed his eyes, thought about Evelyn sitting alone in that courtroom, about corporations that destroyed people and claimed it was just business, about technology that could bring clean water to millions of people being locked away because it threatened someone's profit margin. He thought about Nina, 12 years old and already understanding that sometimes you had to stand up for things even when it was hard. He thought about the witness stand he'd repaired that morning, about cracks that made things stronger, about breaks that could be mended with the right tools and enough care. Then he slept, dreamlessly, and when his alarm went off at 5 a.m., he was ready. The next 7 days were going to test him in ways he hadn't been tested in years, but that was okay. He'd chosen this. Not because it was easy or because victory was guaranteed, but because it was right. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it had to be. The week passed like water through clenched fingers, too fast and never enough. Lucas arrived at Aquaverde's offices before dawn each morning and left long after dark, his truck's headlights cutting through empty streets while Nina slept safely at home. She'd insisted on staying with her best friend's family during the week, understanding without being told that her father needed to focus completely. That gesture of maturity broke his heart and filled it simultaneously. By day 3, Lucas's dining room table had disappeared beneath case files. His coffee consumption had tripled. The calluses on his hands from carpentry work were joined by the different kind of soreness that came from hours of writing, typing, thinking. His brain felt like it was running a marathon after years of casual jogging, muscles screaming as they remembered what they'd once been capable of. But it was working. Slowly, painfully, The shape of the defense was emerging. Sarah had constructed a timeline so detailed and visually clear that even someone with no legal background could follow the progression of Evelyn's research. Lab notebooks from 5 years ago, thesis drafts from 4 years ago, patent applications from 3 years ago, all predating her Meridian consulting period by months or years. The story was undeniable. Evelyn Moore had developed her technology independently, systematically, with clear documentation at every step. Evelyn had written a technical breakdown that was somehow both accessible and rigorous, explaining exactly how her filtration system worked and what made it revolutionary. Lucas had read it 4 times, asked dozens of clarifying questions, until he understood not just what she'd done but why it mattered. The innovation wasn't just in the components, it was in the elegant simplicity of how they fit together, the mathematical optimization of flow rates and pressure gradients, the manufacturing process that made affordability possible without sacrificing quality. The more Lucas understood, the more convinced he became that Meridian's lawsuit was exactly what Evelyn claimed, a sophisticated attempt at theft disguised as intellectual property protection. On day 5, Lucas found something that changed everything. He was reading through depositions at 2 a.m, eyes burning, when he came across testimony from Dr. Marcus Webb, a former Meridian research director who'd left the company 6 months before the lawsuit was filed. Brighton had deposed him, but clearly hadn't understood the significance of what Webb was saying. Webb testified that Meridian's water filtration research during the period when Evelyn was consulting had been preliminary at best and not production ready. He described internal company documents showing that Meridian's own systems were still in early development phases, with significant technical problems they hadn't solved. Most damning, he testified that several Meridian executives had discussed how Evelyn's published research had influenced their own approach, meaning they'd learned from her, not the other way around. Brighton had asked a few follow-up questions, then moved on. He'd missed the implications entirely. Lucas sat back, feeling the pieces click into place. This wasn't just a defense. It was potentially a counteroffensive. If Meridian's own former research director testified that their technology had been influenced by Evelyn's published work, it flipped the entire theft narrative. It suggested that Meridian was accusing her of stealing ideas that had actually originated with her. He called Sarah despite the late hour. She answered on the second ring, sounding wide awake. "Please tell me you found something." Webb's deposition, pages 47 through 63. "Did you see this?" "I saw it. Brighton didn't think it was important. He was focused on proving Evelyn's work was independent. He never considered proving that Meridian's work was derivative." "We need Webb at the hearing. Is he still willing to testify?" "I don't know. Brighton never followed up with him after the deposition, but I have his contact information. I can reach out." "Do it. First thing in the morning. We need him." Lucas paused. "Sarah, you've been incredible through all this. You know that, right? You didn't have to help us." "Yes, I did." Her voice was firm. "I became a paralegal because I believed in justice, in using law to help people. Watching Brighton throw this case while Evelyn fought for something that mattered, I couldn't be part of that, even if it costs me my job. If we win, you'll have better job offers than you know what to do with. And if we lose, then at least we'll lose honestly. That's worth something." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Lucas, can I ask you something? Why did you really take this case? I know what you said in court about standing up for someone who needed help, but there's something else. I can tell." Lucas looked at the files spread across his table, thought about the question. 7 years ago, I was part of a legal team that defended a pharmaceutical company. They'd hidden dangerous side effects of a medication. People died. We knew about it. Not at first, but eventually, we knew. And we won anyway. We were that good. When it was over, I had a corner office and a partnership track, and I couldn't sleep at night. A few months later, my wife died in a car accident, and I realized that life was too short to spend it defending people who hurt others for profit. So I walked away. But walking away didn't fix what I'd done. It just meant I stopped making it worse. And now? Now I have a chance to use what I learned, all that corporate litigation experience, to stop the kind of thing I used to facilitate. Maybe that's redemption, or maybe it's just trying to balance the scales a little. I don't know, but it feels right. "It is right," Sarah said. Get some sleep. We have 2 more days. Lucas hung up, but he didn't sleep. Instead, he kept reading, kept making notes, kept building the case in his mind. By the time sunlight started creeping through his windows, he had a strategy. It was risky, aggressive, and required perfect execution. But it might work. It had to work. On day 6, Lucas met with Evelyn and Sarah to review their hearing preparation. They gathered in the conference room at Aqua Verde, the space that had become their war room, and Lucas walked them through his plan. Meridian's motion for summary judgment rests on 3 pillars, he said, drawing on the whiteboard. 1, that Evelyn had access to their research. 2, that the similarities between systems prove theft. 3, that their expert witness confirms this conclusion. We're going to knock down all 3 pillars. How? Evelyn asked. Pillar 1 is actually our friend. Yes, you had access to their research, but Webb's testimony shows that their research during that time was preliminary and actually influenced by your published work. Access doesn't equal theft. It equals exposure to the truth that your innovations came first. Pillar 2 falls apart when we force their expert to be specific. He can't identify unique proprietary elements because there aren't any. The similarities he cites are industry-standard approaches. Pillar 3 collapses when we bring Webb in to contradict their narrative. Sarah looked worried. Lucas, I reached out to Webb. He's willing to testify, but he's nervous. Meridian's lawyers have been pressuring him. They've threatened legal action if he says anything that violates his NDA. What NDA? The one all Meridian employees sign. Standard confidentiality agreement. Lucas felt a flicker of anger. They're using NDAs to silence witnesses about their own misconduct. That's exactly the kind of abuse that makes cases like this necessary. We'll need to address that with the judge, possibly get a protective order. Webb's testimony is too important to lose. There's something else, Evelyn said quietly. I got a call yesterday from Meridian's CEO, James Thornton. He wanted to make one final settlement offer. Lucas set down his marker. And? He offered to drop the lawsuit entirely if I agree to sell Aqua Verde to Meridian for half its current valuation. No admission of wrongdoing, no damages. Just sell the company and walk away. That's a significant concession from their previous demands. It's also a trap. If I sell now, they get exactly what they wanted, control of the technology, and they can spin the settlement as vindication of their claims. Plus, the sale price is deliberately lowball. It's designed to look generous while actually being insulting. Lucas studied her face. Are you tempted? 2 months ago, I might have been. The legal fees, the stress, watching my company struggle while this lawsuit hangs over everything, it's been brutal. But now, she shook her head. Now I'm angry. They tried to intimidate me into surrendering. They got to my attorney. They're using the legal system as a weapon to steal something I built. Even if we lose on Tuesday, even if this destroys everything I've worked for, I'm not giving them the satisfaction of walking away. Good, Lucas said, because we're not going to lose. The confidence in his voice surprised even himself, but he meant it. Somewhere during the long nights of preparation, the fear had transformed into something else. Not certainty. He'd been a lawyer too long to believe in certainty. But conviction. A sense that the truth was on their side, and if he did his job well enough, the truth would be enough. That night, Lucas had dinner with Nina at Giuseppe's. Their Friday tradition, maintained despite everything. She looked tired, exams at school, staying with friends, worrying about him even though she tried to hide it. But she smiled when he slid into their booth. So, she said, big day on Tuesday. Big day on Tuesday. Are you ready? Lucas thought about that question. Was he ready? A week ago, he'd been a carpenter. Now he was about to walk into a courtroom and face one of the most formidable corporate litigators in the state. Ready seemed like a strong word. I'm as ready as I can be, he said finally. I've done everything I know how to do. The rest is up to the judge. And you, Nina pointed out, how you present the case, how you handle their lawyer, that matters, right? It does. Then you'll be great. Because you're good at this, Dad. You always were. You just forgot for a while. I didn't forget. I chose to do something else. But now you're choosing this. And I think it's the right choice. Nina paused, picking at her pizza. Mom would think so too. She always said you were happiest when you were fighting for something that mattered. Lucas felt his throat tighten. Your mom said a lot of wise things. She did. And one of them was that you were the best lawyer she'd ever seen when you cared about the case. So care about this one, Dad. Care like you used to, and you'll win. They finished dinner, talked about her school week, her upcoming science project, normal things that anchored him. When they parted in the parking lot, Nina hugged him tight. Remember what matters, she whispered, but also remember that sometimes what matters is standing up for the right thing. You're doing that. I'm proud of you. Lucas held his daughter, feeling the weight and gift of her support. Then he drove home, spent one more night reviewing his notes, and finally allowed himself to sleep. Tuesday morning arrived with cloudless skies and unusual heat. Lucas dressed carefully, the first time he'd worn a suit in 6 years. It still fit, though it felt strange against his skin, too formal after years of work boots and tool belts. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Not the carpenter, not quite the lawyer he'd been before. Something in between, maybe. Something new. He met Evelyn and Sarah at the courthouse at 8:30. Evelyn wore a simple navy suit, her expression calm but her hands trembling slightly when she shook his hand. Sarah carried 3 briefcases full of organized files, her efficiency a shield against nervousness. Ready? Lucas asked. No, Evelyn said honestly. But let's do this anyway. They walked into courtroom 6 together. The gallery was packed. Reporters, courthouse regulars, people from Aqua Verde showing their support, representatives from Meridian looking confident and expensive. The air hummed with anticipation. Richard Hale was already at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by his team. He glanced up when Lucas entered, and something flickered across his face. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. The janitor had shown up in a suit and looked like he belonged. That was worth noting. Judge Chen entered promptly at 9. Everyone rose, then settled. The judge surveyed the courtroom, her expression giving nothing away. We're here on Meridian Solutions' motion for summary judgment, she said. This is a significant motion. If granted, it ends this case without trial. Mr. Hale, you may proceed. Hale rose, moved to the podium with practiced ease. For the next 20 minutes, he presented Meridian's case with devastating efficiency. He walked through the timeline of Evelyn's consulting period, highlighted the similarities between systems, quoted extensively from their expert witness, Dr. Hutchison. His argument was polished, confident, seemingly airtight. The evidence is overwhelming, Your Honor, Hale concluded. Ms. Moore had access, opportunity, and motive. The technical similarities cannot be explained by coincidence. Our expert has confirmed that intellectual property theft occurred. There are no genuine disputes of material fact. Summary judgment is appropriate, and we respectfully request that this court grant our motion, award damages, and issue the requested injunction. He sat down. His team looked satisfied. The reporters were typing furiously. Judge Chen turned to Lucas. Mr. Reed, your response. Lucas stood, gathered his notes, walked to the podium. For a moment, he just stood there, letting the silence build. This was the moment he'd been preparing for all week. This was where 7 days of work, 6 years of absence, and a lifetime of learning came together. Your Honor, he began, Mr. Hale has presented a compelling story. It has all the elements of a good narrative, opportunity, suspicious similarities, expert confirmation, but it has one critical flaw. It's not true. He saw Hale's jaw tighten slightly. Good. He was listening. Let's start with access, Lucas continued. Yes, Ms. Moore worked as a consultant for Meridian. Yes, she had access to their research files, but what Mr. Hale conveniently fails to mention is what that research actually showed. I'd like to call the court's attention to the deposition of Dr. Marcus Webb, Meridian's former research director. Sarah handed him the relevant pages. Lucas read selected passages aloud, his voice clear and steady. Webb's testimony about Meridian's research being preliminary, about their systems not being production-ready, about how Evelyn's published work had influenced their approach. Dr. Webb's testimony fundamentally undermines the theft narrative, Lucas said. It's not that Ms. Moore stole from Meridian. It's that Meridian was trying to catch up to Ms. Moore's innovations, which had already been published in peer-reviewed journals before she ever set foot in their offices. Your Honor, Hale interrupted, rising, Dr. Webb is a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. His testimony is biased and unreliable. Mr. Hale, you'll have your chance to respond, Judge Chen said sharply. Mr. Reed, continue. Lucas nodded. Let's move to the similarities. Mr. Hale claims that the technical parallels between systems prove theft. But what parallels is he actually talking about? Both systems use ceramic filtration, a technology that's been in use since the 1990s. Both use UV sterilization, another industry standard approach. Both have modular designs, a common feature in water filtration systems. He pulled up Sarah's visual timeline on the courtroom's display screen, showing the evolution of Evelyn's technology. What Mr. Hale doesn't explain is that all of these elements appear in Ms. Moore's graduate research from 5 years ago. Her thesis, published and publicly available, describes the exact combination of ceramic filtration and UV sterilization that Meridian now claims to own. Her patent applications from 3 years ago, predating her Meridian consulting by 18 months, detail the modular design approach. Lucas let that sink in, watching Judge Chen's expression. She was following closely, making notes. The similarities exist not because Ms. Moore stole from Meridian, but because Ms. Moore pioneered an approach that Meridian later tried to replicate. The timeline makes this undeniable. And yet Mr. Hale would have this court ignore chronology entirely and accept that somehow Ms. Moore traveled backward in time to steal ideas that wouldn't exist for another year. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Hale's expression darkened. Finally, let's address the expert testimony, Lucas said. Dr. Hutchison claims the similarities prove theft, but I've read his report carefully, and something is conspicuously absent. He never identifies a single specific proprietary innovation that Meridian developed and Ms. Moore stole. He speaks in generalities about technical approaches and design philosophies, but he cannot point to one concrete element and say, this is uniquely Meridian's. And here's the evidence that Miss Moore took it. Lucas looked directly at Hale now. That's because no such element exists. Meridian's case relies on creating an impression of theft without proving actual theft. It's smoke and mirrors, Your Honor. Sophisticated smoke and mirrors, but smoke and mirrors nonetheless. He paused, gathering himself for the final argument. Your Honor, summary judgment is appropriate only when there are no genuine disputes of material fact, but this case is full of factual disputes. Did Meridian's research actually predate Ms. Moore's? The testimony says no. Are the similarities evidence of theft or evidence of industry standard practices? That's disputed. Is Dr. Hutchison's expert opinion reliable when it lacks specificity? That's disputed. These are precisely the kind of questions that require a trial, where evidence can be tested and witnesses can be cross-examined. Judge Chen leaned forward. Mr. Reed, are you prepared to bring Dr. Webb as a witness if this goes to trial? Yes, Your Honor. Despite Meridian's attempts to intimidate him with NDA threats, Dr. Webb is willing to testify to the truth. Intimidate? Hale was on his feet. Your Honor, that's a serious accusation with no basis in fact. Is Dr. Webb willing to testify? Judge Chen asked Lucas. He is. We can have him here within the hour if Your Honor wishes to hear directly from him. Judge Chen considered this. That won't be necessary today, but I'm concerned about these allegations of witness intimidation. Mr. Hale, has your client contacted Dr. Webb regarding his testimony? We sent a routine letter reminding him of his confidentiality obligations, Hale said carefully. Standard practice when former employees are involved in litigation. A routine letter threatening legal action if he testifies truthfully, Lucas interjected. We have a copy of that letter, Your Honor. It's in our response brief. Judge Chen flipped through the documents before her, found the letter, read it. Her frown deepened. Mr. Hale, this letter is aggressive to the point of being potentially obstructive. Using NDAs to prevent factual testimony about company conduct is problematic. Your Honor, we're simply protecting our intellectual property. You're attempting to silence a witness who has direct knowledge of the facts. That's different. Judge Chen set the letter aside. I'm going to issue a protective order for Dr. Webb. He may testify to factual matters without fear of NDA enforcement. If Meridian has a problem with that, they can file an appeal. Lucas felt a surge of hope. That was a significant ruling, and it suggested Judge Chen was skeptical of Meridian's tactics. Hale sensed the shift too. Your Honor, even if we set aside Dr. Webb's testimony, the fundamental facts remain. Ms. Moore had access to our research. The systems are similar. Our expert confirms— Your expert confirms similarities, Judge Chen interrupted. But as Mr. Reed points out, he doesn't explain why those similarities prove theft rather than independent development. That's a problem, Mr. Hale. A significant one. With respect, Your Honor, the timeline alone is suspicious. Ms. Moore consulted for Meridian, then immediately launched a competing product with remarkably similar features. Not immediately, Lucas said. Ms. Moore launched Aquaverde 18 months after her consulting period ended, and only after 2 more years of development work. And as the timeline shows, the core features of her system were documented in her graduate research years before Meridian entered the picture. Judge Chen was quiet for a long moment, reviewing her notes. The courtroom held its collective breath. Gentlemen, I've heard enough, she said finally. Mr. Hale, your motion presents a compelling case on the surface, but Mr. Reed has identified significant factual disputes that cannot be resolved on summary judgment. The timeline of Ms. Moore's research, the nature of Meridian's research during the relevant period, the specificity or lack thereof in your experts' opinions. These are questions for a jury, not for summary judgment. Hale's face went carefully blank. Lucas felt his heart hammering. Therefore, Judge Chen continued, Meridian's motion for summary judgment is denied. The gallery erupted. Reporters were typing frantically. People from Aquaverde were hugging each other. Meridian's representatives looked stunned. Judge Chen's gavel came down hard. Order. This is not a final ruling on the merits. It simply means we proceed to trial. Both parties should be prepared for a full hearing on the underlying claims. She looked at both legal teams. I'm setting a trial date for 8 weeks from today. That gives you time to complete discovery, prepare witnesses, and file any additional motions. I expect both sides to engage in good faith settlement discussions during this period. Mr. Hale, I'm particularly interested in your client's willingness to settle, given that their motion for quick resolution has failed. We'll certainly discuss settlement, Your Honor, Hale said, his voice tight. See that you do. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down again. People began standing, gathering belongings, talking in excited whispers. Lucas felt Evelyn's hand on his arm, saw tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said. I don't know how you did that, but thank you. We're not done, Lucas reminded her. This just means we get to fight. We haven't won yet. No, but we have a chance, a real one. That's more than I had a week ago. Sarah was grinning, practically bouncing. Did you see Hale's face? He was so confident, and then you just systematically took apart his entire argument. That was incredible. Lucas allowed himself a small smile. He's going to come back harder. Count on it. Losing a summary judgment motion is embarrassing for a lawyer of his caliber. He'll want revenge. Let him try, Evelyn said fiercely. We'll be ready. They gathered their materials, started filing out. As they passed the plaintiff's table, Hale stood, blocking their path. Congratulations, Mr. Reed, he said, his voice cold. You won a battle. The war is far from over. I know, Lucas said, but at least now it's a fair fight. Fair? Hale smiled without warmth. There's nothing fair about this. You got lucky with a sympathetic judge and a compelling story, but luck runs out. And when it does, when we go to trial and I put your client on the stand and expose every hole in her story, when the jury sees the evidence in full context, you're going to wish you'd convinced her to settle. Maybe. Or maybe the jury will see exactly what Judge Chen saw today, that your case is built on intimidation and misdirection, and that the truth is on our side. Hale's jaw tightened. You're naive if you think truth matters more than presentation. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've destroyed better lawyers than you with more credible clients than Ms. Moore. Don't mistake one small victory for actual competence. And don't mistake my 6-year absence for weakness, Lucas replied. I remember how to do this, Mr. Hale. Maybe better than you realize. They stood there for a moment, 2 lawyers sizing each other up, neither willing to look away first. Finally, Hale stepped aside. "See you in 8 weeks, counselor. Enjoy your temporary success while it lasts." Lucas walked past him, Evelyn and Sarah following. Outside the courtroom, they were immediately surrounded by reporters, cameras, questions flying from all directions. "Mr. Reed, how does it feel to be back in court after 6 years?" "Ms. Moore, do you feel vindicated by the judge's ruling?" "Will you consider Meridian's settlement offers?" Lucas raised a hand and the crowd quieted slightly. "We're pleased that Judge Chen recognized the need for a full trial. The evidence will show that Ms. Moore developed her technology independently and that Meridian's lawsuit is an attempt to suppress competition. We look forward to presenting our case to a jury. That's all we have to say at this time." They pushed through the crowd, made it to the parking lot. Only when they were away from the cameras and reporters did Evelyn finally let out a long breath. "That was intense." "That was just the beginning," Lucas said. "We have 8 weeks to prepare for trial, 8 weeks to gather more evidence, prepare witnesses, build a case that's not just defensible but winning. Today bought us time. Now we have to use it." "What's next?" Sarah asked. "Next, we get Dr. Webb's testimony locked down. We prepare Evelyn to testify. We find our own expert witness to counter Hutchison. We go through Meridian's research files with a microscope looking for anything that shows their technology was derivative, not innovative. And we prepare for Hale to come at us with everything he's got." Evelyn nodded slowly. "You're still willing to do this? See it through to trial?" "Are you?" "Yes, absolutely." "Then so am I." Lucas paused. "But I need to be honest. Hale was right about one thing. Today was just a battle, not the war. Trial is different from motions practice. It's longer, more intense, more unpredictable. The stakes are higher, and Hale is going to be even more dangerous when he has a jury to play to." "Can we beat him?" Evelyn asked directly. Lucas thought about that question carefully. A week ago, he would have said the odds were against them. Now, having spent 7 days deep in the evidence, understanding the case inside and out, seeing Judge Chen's reaction to their arguments, now he had a different answer. "Yes," he said, "we can beat him, not because we're luckier or because we have more resources, but because we have the truth, and if we present it well enough, if we make it impossible for the jury to ignore the timeline and the facts and the evidence, yes, we can win." Evelyn smiled, the first genuinely hopeful smile he'd seen from her. "Then let's get to work." They stood there in the courthouse parking lot, 3 people who'd been strangers 2 weeks ago, now bound together by a common cause. The sun was bright overhead, the day was warm, and somewhere inside Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just purpose, not just conviction, but the simple, powerful knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The carpenter had become a lawyer again, and this time he was fighting for the right side. The 8 weeks between the motion hearing and trial moved differently than the first frantic 7 days. Lucas settled into a rhythm that was intense but sustainable, dividing his time between preparing for trial and maintaining the life he'd built with Nina. He took her to school most mornings, worked at Aqua Verde until evening, came home for dinner. They still had their Friday nights at Giuseppe's, still talked about her homework and her friends and the ordinary things that kept them grounded. But underneath the routine, the case was building momentum. Dr. Marcus Webb agreed to serve as their primary witness, and Lucas spent hours with him, learning the intricate details of Meridian's research program during the time Evelyn had consulted there. Webb was nervous but determined, and the more they talked, the clearer the picture became. Meridian hadn't just failed to develop the technology they now claimed to own, they'd actively studied Evelyn's published work and tried to reverse engineer her approaches. Webb had internal emails proving it, documents he'd saved when he left the company because he'd suspected something like this might happen. They talked about her like she was the competition, Webb explained during one of their preparation sessions. Not like she'd stolen from them, like she'd beaten them to market with better technology. The lawsuit came later after their own attempts to match her system kept failing. It was easier to claim she'd stolen their work than to admit they couldn't compete. Sarah tracked down additional witnesses, former Meridian employees, academics who'd reviewed both systems, customers who'd used Aqua Verde's filtration technology in communities across the developing world. Each one added another piece to the mosaic Lucas was assembling, a story not just of innocence, but of innovation being attacked by corporate greed. They found their own expert witness in Dr. Patricia Chen, a professor of engineering at MIT who'd spent 30 years studying water filtration systems. She reviewed all the evidence, both sides' claims, and delivered an opinion that was devastating to Meridian's case. Not only were the similarities between systems based on industry-standard approaches, but Evelyn's innovations were actually more sophisticated than anything Meridian had developed. The technical specifications proved beyond doubt that Evelyn's work was original, groundbreaking, and entirely her own. "This isn't even a close call," Dr. Chen told Lucas during their third meeting. "Ms. Moore's system represents a genuine advance in the field. Meridian's claims are technically illiterate. Any engineer who actually understands this technology would laugh at the idea that she stole from them." Lucas spent long nights preparing his trial strategy, wargaming every possible angle Hale might take. He drafted opening statements, cross-examination questions, closing arguments. He made Sarah practice testimony with him, playing the role of hostile opposing counsel until she could handle any question without flinching. He worked with Evelyn on her own testimony, helping her translate technical brilliance into language a jury could understand and connect with emotionally. "Tell them why you started Aquaverde," he coached her during one session. "Not the technical reasons. The human reasons." Evelyn thought for a moment, then spoke with a quiet intensity that gave Lucas chills. "My mother died when I was 15, cholera, from contaminated water. We were living in a rural area of the Philippines at the time, visiting my grandparents. Clean water just wasn't available. She got sick, and by the time we got her to a hospital with proper treatment, it was too late. I watched her die from something completely preventable. That's why I became an engineer. That's why I focused on water filtration. Because no one should lose someone they love to something as basic as dirty water." "That," Lucas said, "that's what you tell the jury. That's why you built this technology. Not for money, not for fame, to save lives." The story transformed how they approached the case. It wasn't just about intellectual property anymore. It was about what happened when corporations tried to suppress technology that could help millions of people because it threatened their profit margins. That narrative, corporation versus humanitarian, greed versus compassion, would resonate with a jury in ways that technical specifications never could. But Hale wasn't sitting idle. Meridian filed motion after motion, trying to exclude Webb's testimony, trying to limit what Dr. Chen could say, trying to prevent certain documents from being admitted into evidence. Each motion required a response, hours of legal research and writing, arguments before Judge Chen. Lucas won some, lost others, but he was holding his ground. 3 weeks before trial, Meridian made another settlement offer. This time, they were willing to drop all claims and pay Evelyn $2 million, but only if she agreed to license her technology to Meridian at favorable rates and signed a non-disparagement agreement. "It's a better offer," Evelyn admitted when she called Lucas to discuss it, "but it still gives them access to my technology, and the non-disparagement clause means I can never talk about what they did. They're trying to buy my silence." "What do you want to do?" Lucas asked. "I want to go to trial. I want a jury to hear what they tried to do to me. Even if we lose, I want the truth on the record." "Then that's what we'll do." But Lucas called Hale personally to reject the offer. The conversation was brief and icy. "Your client is making a mistake," Hale said. "My offer was generous given the strength of our case. She's going to regret this." "Maybe," Lucas replied. "Or maybe you're going to regret pushing this to trial. I guess we'll find out." 2 weeks before trial, Lucas got a call from an unexpected source. Benjamin Marsh, the retired court clerk who'd worked at the courthouse for 40 years before retiring 5 years ago. Lucas had cleaned his office dozens of times, and they'd always gotten along well. Marsh had heard about the case, about Lucas stepping back into law, and wanted to help. "I remember you when you practiced before," Marsh said when they met for coffee. "You were good, really good. And I remember Hale too. He's brilliant, but he has a weakness." "What's that?" "Arrogance. He's so confident in his ability to intimidate and overwhelm that he sometimes misses the simple human elements of a case. He thinks everything is about legal strategy and courtroom dominance. But juries are people. They respond to authenticity, to genuine emotion. If you can make them care about your client as a person, Hale's technical brilliance won't matter as much." Lucas absorbed this advice, incorporated it into his preparation. He refined his opening statement to lead with Evelyn's story, to make the jury see her as a daughter who'd lost her mother, an innovator trying to prevent others from experiencing that loss, an entrepreneur being crushed by a corporation that couldn't compete fairly. The week before trial, Nina asked to see his opening statement. They were at Giuseppe's, their Friday tradition, and she'd been quieter than usual through dinner. "You sure?" Lucas asked. "It's pretty dry legal stuff." "Dad, I'm 12, not 6. I can handle it." He showed her his notes, walked her through the structure. She listened intently, then frowned. "It's good," she said, "but it's missing something." "What?" "You're telling them why Evelyn matters. But you should also tell them why this case matters. Not just to her, to everyone. If corporations can use lawsuits to steal from people who create things that help others, that affects everybody, it means the people with the most money get to decide what innovations happen. That's wrong." Lucas stared at his daughter, once again amazed by her insight. "You're absolutely right. How did you get so smart?" "I learned from watching you and Mom." She paused. "Dad, are you scared about the trial?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But that's okay. Being scared means it matters." "You're going to be great. You know why?" "Why?" "Because you're not just fighting for Evelyn. You're fighting for the person you used to be before Mom died. The person who believed law could make things better. This is your chance to prove that was true." The night before trial, Lucas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed reviewing arguments in his mind, worrying about witnesses, running through cross-examination questions. Around 2 a.m., he gave up and went to his kitchen, made coffee, spread his notes across the table one more time. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Can't sleep either. Thank you for everything, whatever happens tomorrow." He replied, "We're going to win. Get some rest." Another text, this one from Sarah. "Trial day. Let's show them what truth looks like." Lucas smiled despite his nerves. He'd started this journey alone in a courthouse, fixing a broken witness stand. Now he had a team. People who believed in the case, in each other, in the possibility that doing the right thing might actually matter. At dawn, he showered, dressed in his suit, made breakfast for Nina. She came downstairs already dressed for school, gave him a fierce hug. "Win," she said simply. "I'll do my best." "Your best is pretty good, Dad." He dropped her at school, drove to the courthouse, met Evelyn and Sarah in the lobby. They rode the elevator in silence, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them. When they entered courtroom 6, it was already packed. Every seat filled, reporters in the back, cameras outside. This case had become news. The janitor turned lawyer defending a humanitarian entrepreneur against a corporate giant. People loved an underdog story. Lucas just hoped this one had a happy ending. Hale arrived with his full team, 4 attorneys and a paralegal, all carrying briefcases and projectors and demonstrative exhibits. They set up at their table like a military operation, everything precise and choreographed. Lucas watched them and felt a flicker of doubt. How was he supposed to compete with that kind of resources and coordination? Then he looked at Evelyn, remembered her mother dying from contaminated water, remembered the communities around the world using AquaVerde technology to access clean water for the first time in their lives, remembered the simple truth at the heart of this case. He didn't need to match Hale's resources. He just needed to tell that truth clearly enough that the jury couldn't ignore it. Judge Chen entered. Everyone rose. The jury filed in, 12 people chosen after 2 days of voir dire, a mix of ages and backgrounds. Lucas had tried to select people who would respond to human stories rather than technical arguments, people who might distrust corporate power, people who seemed thoughtful and fair. He'd done his best. Now he had to trust them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Chen addressed the jury, "we're here for the trial of Meridian Solutions versus AquaVerde Technologies and Evelyn Moore. You've been selected to hear this case and render a verdict based on the evidence presented. Opening statements will now begin. Mr. Hale, you may proceed." Hale rose and commanded the room immediately. For 45 minutes, he presented Meridian's case with devastating efficiency. He painted Evelyn as a consultant who'd betrayed trust, stolen proprietary research, and built a company on theft. He used technical diagrams, timeline charts, Quotes from Dr. Hutchison's expert report. He was smooth, confident, convincing. The evidence will show, Hale concluded, that Ms. Moore had opportunity, motive, and means. She had access to our research. She had a reason to take it, financial gain, and she had the technical expertise to incorporate our innovations into her own designs. This isn't a story of independent innovation. It's a story of intellectual property theft, and we ask that you hold her accountable. He sat down. The jury looked impressed, some of them nodding slightly. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. Then it was his turn. He stood, walked to the podium, looked at the 12 faces in the jury box. For a moment he didn't speak. Just let them see him. Let them wonder what this carpenter-turned-lawyer was going to say. Evelyn Moore was 15 years old when her mother died. He began quietly. Not from cancer, not from an accident, from cholera, from drinking contaminated water in a rural area where clean water simply wasn't available. She watched her mother suffer and die from something completely preventable, something as basic as access to clean drinking water. He saw several jurors lean forward, attention caught. That experience changed Evelyn's life. She became an engineer specifically to solve this problem. She spent years researching, developing, testing. She created a water filtration system that's more efficient and affordable than anything else on the market. Not for profit, though she's earned that honestly, but because she remembered watching her mother die, and she didn't want other people to experience that loss. Lucas paused. Let that sink in. Meridian Solutions is a corporation that sells water filtration systems primarily to wealthy clients in developed countries. They charge premium prices, lock customers into long-term contracts, prioritize profit over access. When Evelyn developed a system that could provide clean water to communities that Meridian ignored, when her technology started winning contracts and changing lives, Meridian couldn't compete. So instead of innovating, instead of improving their own systems, they did something easier. They sued. They claimed that Evelyn's technology, which she'd developed in graduate school, which she'd published in academic journals, which she'd patented before she ever worked with them, was somehow stolen from them. He walked closer to the jury box. Mr. Hale just spent 45 minutes telling you a story about theft. I'm going to spend the next few weeks showing you the truth. The evidence will prove that every innovation in Evelyn's system was documented in her research years before she consulted for Meridian. The evidence will prove that Meridian's own research director will testify that their technology was actually influenced by Evelyn's published work, not the other way around. The evidence will prove that the similarities Mr. Hale talks about are industry-standard approaches, not proprietary innovations. Lucas gestured toward Hale's table. Meridian wants you to believe that Evelyn Moore is a thief, but the real story is different. The real story is about a corporation that can't compete fairly, trying to use the legal system as a weapon to destroy someone who dared to innovate in ways they couldn't. The real story is about power trying to silence progress. And the real story is about why we have juries, to protect people like Evelyn from exactly this kind of abuse. He returned to the podium, his voice strengthening. This case matters, not just to Evelyn, though it matters deeply to her. It matters to everyone who believes that innovation should be rewarded, not punished. It matters to every community around the world that has access to clean water because of Evelyn's technology. And it matters to you because if we allow corporations to use lawsuits to steal from people who create things that help others, we're saying that the people with the most money get to decide what innovations happen. That's not justice. That's not America. And that's not what you're going to allow when you've heard all the evidence. Lucas looked each juror in the eye. Listen carefully to the testimony. Look closely at the documents. Ask yourselves whether the evidence actually proves theft, or whether it just proves that Evelyn was better at innovation than Meridian wanted her to be. And when you've heard everything, I trust you'll deliver a verdict that's based on truth, not power. Thank you. He sat down. The courtroom was silent for a moment, then quiet murmurs rippled through the gallery. Judge Chen gavelled for order. Mr. Hale, call your first witness. The trial began in earnest. For 3 days, Hale presented Meridian's case. He called technical experts, former Meridian employees, people who testified about the consulting agreement and Evelyn's access to research files. Dr. Hutchison took the stand and spent hours explaining his opinion that the similarities between systems proved intellectual property theft. Lucas cross-examined each witness carefully, methodically. He got Meridian employees to admit that Evelyn had only worked on projects unrelated to the filtration technology in question. He got technical experts to concede that the features they called similar were actually standard industry practices. And with Dr. Hutchison, he went for the throat. Dr. Hutchison, you've testified that the similarities between systems prove theft, correct? Yes, that's my professional opinion. Can you identify one specific, unique, proprietary innovation that Meridian developed and Ms. Moore stole? Hutchison hesitated. The combination of elements. One specific innovation, Doctor. Not a combination. One concrete thing. Well, the ceramic filtration approach has been in use since the 1990s, hasn't it? Yes, but... And the UV sterilization? Also industry standard, but... And the modular design? Common in filtration systems, yes, but when you combine them all, when you combine industry standard elements, Doctor, do they magically become proprietary? It's about the specific implementation which Ms. Moore documented in her graduate research 5 years ago, correct? Before she ever met anyone from Meridian? Hutchison shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't asked to review her graduate research in detail. You weren't asked? Or you didn't? I focused on the period during and after her Meridian consulting. So you formed an opinion about whether she stole Meridian's innovations without actually examining whether those innovations existed in her work before Meridian? Doesn't that seem backward, Doctor? I relied on the materials provided by Meridian's counsel. Exactly. You relied on what you were told rather than looking at the complete picture. No further questions. Lucas sat down, feeling the shift in the courtroom's energy. Hutchison had been Meridian's star witness, and Lucas had just exposed the fundamental flaw in his testimony. He'd assumed the conclusion rather than examining the evidence objectively. When it was Lucas's turn to present the defense, he started with the timeline. Sarah had created a visual masterpiece showing the evolution of Evelyn's research, year by year, with specific dates for every lab notebook entry, every publication, every patent application. It was impossible to look at that timeline and believe Evelyn had stolen technology that she'd actually invented first. Then he called Dr. Marcus Webb. Webb was nervous taking the stand, but Lucas had prepared him well. Slowly, carefully, Lucas walked him through his time at Meridian, the state of their research program, the internal discussions about Evelyn's work. Dr. Webb, during the time Ms. Moore was consulting for Meridian, what was the status of Meridian's water filtration research? Preliminary. We had concepts, but nothing production ready. We were struggling with efficiency problems, cost issues. The technology just wasn't coming together. Did Meridian's research team study Ms. Moore's published work? Extensively. Her academic publications were required reading for everyone in the department. We were trying to understand how she'd achieved such high efficiency at such low cost. So Meridian was learning from her, not the other way around? Objection, Hale called. Leading. Sustained, Judge Chen said. Rephrase, Mr. Reed. Dr. Webb, based on your direct observation, who was influencing whom in terms of water filtration innovation? Webb looked directly at the jury. Ms. Moore was the innovator. We were trying to catch up to her. When she left and launched Aquaverde, there were meetings where executives discussed how to compete with her. No one ever suggested she'd stolen from us. The lawsuit came later, after it became clear we couldn't match her technology. Why do you think the lawsuit was filed? Objection, speculation. I'll rephrase. Did you ever hear Meridian executives discuss why they were filing the lawsuit? Yes. In a meeting about 6 months before I left the company, the CEO said that if we couldn't beat Aquaverde in the market, we needed to beat them in court. He said dragging them through expensive litigation might force Ms. Moore to sell or settle, and then we could acquire the technology we couldn't develop ourselves. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing frantically. Jurors were looking at each other with shocked expressions. Hale was on his feet objecting, but Judge Chen overruled him. Did you document this meeting, Dr. Webb? I took notes. I have them. Lucas introduced the notes into evidence. They were damning, a clear record of Meridian's strategy to use litigation as a weapon rather than as a legitimate attempt to protect intellectual property. Hale's cross-examination was aggressive, but Webb held firm. Yes, he'd left Meridian. No, he wasn't a disgruntled employee. He'd left because he disagreed with how the company operated. Yes, he'd signed an NDA, but Judge Chen had ruled he could testify to factual matters. No, he hadn't been paid by Evelyn or Lucas for his testimony. By the time Webb left the stand, the narrative had shifted completely. Lucas called Dr. Patricia Chen next. She walked the jury through a detailed technical analysis showing that Evelyn's innovations were not only original, but actually more sophisticated than Meridian's technology. She explained in clear, accessible language why the similarities Meridian claimed were actually evidence of industry-standard practices, not theft. In your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, did Ms. Moore steal Meridian's intellectual property? Absolutely not. If anything, the evidence suggests Meridian tried to emulate Ms. Moore's approaches and failed. Her work is original, groundbreaking, and entirely her own. Finally, Lucas called Evelyn. She took the stand calmly, dressed simply, looking like exactly what she was, an engineer who'd built something important. Lucas walked her through her story chronologically, letting her tell it in her own words. Her mother's death, her decision to become an engineer, her graduate research, the development of Aqua Verde, the consulting period with Meridian, the decision to walk away when she realized they didn't share her values. Ms. Moore, did you steal any intellectual property from Meridian Solutions? No. Every innovation in my system was developed through my own research, documented in my own lab notebooks, and protected by my own patents. I didn't need to steal from Meridian. I was ahead of them. Why do you think they filed this lawsuit? Because they couldn't compete with me fairly. My technology is better and cheaper, and it threatens their profit model. They'd rather crush me with legal fees than innovate themselves. Hale's cross-examination was brutal. He spent hours trying to trip Evelyn up, searching for inconsistencies, pressing her on every detail of her time at Meridian. But Lucas had prepared her well, and she remained calm, consistent, and credible. Miss Moore, isn't it true that you benefited financially from launching Aqua Verde? I've made money, yes, but that's not why I started the company. I started it to provide clean water to people who need it. A noble claim. But you're a billionaire now, aren't you? On paper, based on my company's valuation. But most of our revenue goes back into expanding operations and subsidizing systems for communities that can't afford full price. I live modestly. I drive a 10-year-old car. I'm not doing this for wealth. Yet, you're fighting very hard to keep control of your technology. Because if Meridian takes it, they'll lock it behind patents and price it out of reach for the people who need it most. That's why I'm fighting, not for money, for mission. When Evelyn left the stand after 2 days of testimony, Lucas could see the jury believed her. They saw her as genuine, passionate, and honest. Everything Hale had tried to suggest about her being a calculating thief had fallen flat against the reality of who she actually was. Closing arguments came on Friday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after trial began. Hale went first, giving an impassioned summary of Meridian's case, but even his considerable skill couldn't overcome the weight of evidence Lucas had presented. Then it was Lucas's turn for the final time. He stood before the jury, these 12 people who would decide everything, and spoke from the heart. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Hale told you a story about intellectual property theft. This week, you've heard the truth. Evelyn Moore didn't steal from Meridian. She innovated in ways they couldn't match. She built something that helps people they ignored. And when her success threatened their market dominance, they tried to destroy her. He walked along the jury box. You've seen the evidence, the timeline that proves every innovation came from Evelyn's independent research. Dr. Webb's testimony about Meridian's strategy to use litigation as a weapon. Dr. Chen's expert analysis confirming Evelyn's work is original and superior. Evelyn's own testimony about why she does this work. All of it points to one conclusion. Meridian's lawsuit is baseless. It's corporate bullying disguised as intellectual property protection. Lucas paused, looked at each juror. Your verdict matters. Not just to Evelyn, though it will determine whether she keeps the company she built or loses everything. Your verdict matters to everyone who believes innovation should be rewarded, not punished. It matters to every community using Aqua Verde technology to access clean water. And it matters to all of us who want to live in a country where having the best lawyers doesn't matter more than having the truth. He returned to the podium. Meridian had every advantage in this case. More lawyers, more resources, more time to prepare, but they didn't have one thing, the facts on their side. You've heard those facts, you've seen the evidence, and now I'm asking you to deliver a verdict that reflects the truth. Find that Evelyn Moore did not steal Meridian's intellectual property. Find that this lawsuit was exactly what it appears to be, an attempt by a corporation to suppress competition they couldn't handle, and send a message that in this courtroom, in this country, truth matters more than power. He looked at them one final time. Thank you for your service. I trust you to do what's right. Judge Chen gave the jury their instructions. They filed out to begin deliberations. And then there was nothing to do but wait. Lucas, Evelyn, and Sarah sat in a small conference room down the hall from the courtroom. Hours passed. No one said much. They were beyond words now, beyond strategy. Everything they could do, they'd done. At 6 p.m., word came that the jury had reached a verdict. They returned to the courtroom. The gallery had filled again, everyone wanting to see how the story ended. Hale looked confident, but Lucas noticed tension in his shoulders. He wasn't certain anymore. The jury filed in. Lucas tried to read their faces, gave up. Some looked at Evelyn, others didn't. It was impossible to know. Judge Chen addressed the foreperson. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Please read it. The foreperson stood, unfolded a paper, and began to read. In the matter of Meridian Solutions versus Aquaverde Technologies and Evelyn Moore, on the charge of intellectual property theft, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of breach of contract, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom exploded into cheers. Evelyn was crying, Sarah was hugging her, people were standing and applauding. Lucas sat very still for a moment, letting it sink in. They'd won. Actually won. Judge Chen gavelled for order. The jury has spoken. Ms. Moore, you are cleared of all charges. Meridian's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, given the evidence presented regarding Meridian's litigation strategy and attempts to silence witnesses, I am sanctioning Meridian Solutions and ordering them to pay Ms. Moore's attorney fees and costs. This case should never have been brought to trial. More cheers. Hale was gathering his materials, his face carefully blank. He left without looking at Lucas. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Evelyn handled it gracefully, thanking the jury, thanking Lucas, promising that Aquaverde would continue its mission of providing clean water to communities in need. Finally, they escaped to Evelyn's car. The three of them sat there in silence for a moment, exhausted and exhilarated. We did it, Sarah said, almost wonderingly. You did it, Evelyn corrected, looking at Lucas. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. You paid me in something better than money, the chance to use law the way it's supposed to be used, to protect people instead of corporations, to stand up for truth instead of power. That's payment enough. But he was smiling, and so were they. And in that moment, sitting in a parking lot after winning an impossible case, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years: peace, purpose, the sense that he'd found his way back to who he was supposed to be. Not the lawyer he'd been before, not the carpenter he'd become. Something new, something better, something whole. The weeks after the verdict passed in a blur of media attention and unexpected consequences. Lucas woke up the morning after the trial to find his phone flooded with messages. News outlets wanted interviews. Law firms wanted to offer him positions. Potential clients wanted representation. His email inbox had hundreds of unread messages, and his voicemail was completely full. Nina found him at the kitchen table, staring at his phone with an expression somewhere between bewilderment and exhaustion. You're famous, Dad, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. There are news vans outside. Mrs. Patterson from next door called to ask if you'd always been a secret lawyer, or if this was like a superhero origin story. Lucas laughed despite himself. What did you tell her? That you were always a lawyer. You just took a break to be a better dad. Which is true. Nina poured herself cereal, studied him over the bowl. How does it feel? Overwhelming, exhausting. Good, I think? I don't know yet. Are you going back to being a lawyer full-time? It was the question Lucas had been avoiding since the verdict was read. He'd won the case, proven he could still practice law at the highest level, reminded himself why he'd loved this work in the first place, but he'd also remembered why he'd left. The late nights, the stress, the way cases could consume everything until there was no room left for anything else. I don't know, he admitted. I loved being back in court, but I also loved the life we've built. I don't want to lose that. You won't, Nina said with the certainty of someone who'd thought about this more than he had. Because you're not the same person you were before. You know what matters now. You won't forget. He hoped she was right. That afternoon, Evelyn called asking if they could meet. Lucas drove to Aquaverde's offices, found her in the conference room that had served as their war room for months. The boxes were gone now, the space returned to its normal function. But the whiteboard still had remnants of their trial preparation, timeline notes, witness lists, strategy discussions. I can't stop looking at it, Evelyn said when Lucas entered. Proof that it actually happened, that we actually won. We did. Lucas sat across from her. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me is elated. We won. Aquaverde is safe. Meridian can't touch us. But another part is just tired. This case consumed a year of my life. Now it's over, and I don't quite know what to do with myself. That's normal. Big victories can feel surprisingly hollow sometimes. Evelyn smiled slightly. Spoken from experience. Years ago, yes. When I won cases, I wasn't sure I should have won. This is different, though. We won because we were right. That should feel good. It does. Mostly. She paused. Lucas, I asked you here because I want to make you an offer. Actually, Sarah helped me put this together. She's outside, by the way. Should I call her in? Please. Sarah entered, carrying a folder and wearing an expression that suggested she knew something Lucas didn't. They sat on either side of him, and Evelyn opened the folder. Aquaverde is growing faster than I expected, Evelyn began. The publicity from the trial has brought attention to what we do. We're getting requests from communities around the world, contracts from governments and NGOs. We're going to need to expand operations significantly, and as we grow, we're going to face more legal challenges. Maybe not as dramatic as Meridian, but contract negotiations, regulatory compliance, intellectual property protection. We need legal counsel. Lucas saw where this was going. Evelyn, let me finish. I'm not asking you to become a full-time corporate attorney again. I know that's not what you want. But what if you could do both? What if you worked for Aquaverde part-time, handling our legal needs, consulting on cases as they arise? But on your own terms? Set your own hours. Work from home when you need to. Keep doing carpentry if you want. Be there for Nina, but also use your legal skills for something that matters. Sarah slid a document across the table. I took the liberty of drafting a proposal. Part-time counsel, flexible schedule, fair compensation. You'd essentially be building a law practice that fits your life, not the other way around. Lucas read through the proposal, his mind racing. It was exactly what he hadn't known he wanted. A way to use his legal training without sacrificing the balance he'd fought so hard to maintain. A way to practice law ethically for clients who actually deserved representation, on terms that respected his priorities. This is incredibly generous, he said. It's not generous, it's smart, Evelyn corrected. You saved my company, Lucas. You did in a few months what Brighton couldn't do in a year. You're brilliant, ethical, and you actually care about doing the right thing. Those qualities are rare in attorneys. I'd be an idiot not to try to keep you. And selfishly, Sarah added, I'd love to keep working with you. Brighton's firm fired me 3 days ago for disloyalty when I helped you prepare for trial. I've already accepted a position here as Aquaverde's lead paralegal. We make a good team. We could do real good together. Lucas looked at both of them, these women who'd become partners and friends through the crucible of trial. He thought about the cases they could take, the people they could help, the way they could use law as a tool for justice rather than oppression. He thought about Nina, about the life they'd built, about Friday nights at Giuseppe's and helping with homework and being present for the moments that mattered. He thought about the courthouse where he'd worked as a janitor, about the witness stand he'd repaired, about the moment he'd stood up and said, I'll take her case, without any idea where that decision would lead. Can I think about it? he asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Lucas already knew his answer. He just wanted to talk to Nina first. That night at dinner, he laid out Evelyn's offer. Nina listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions about time commitment and flexibility, and what it would mean for their daily routine. Would you still be able to take me to school? She asked. Most days, yes. There might be some mornings when I have early meetings or court appearances, but those would be exceptions. Would we still have Friday nights at Giuseppe's? Absolutely. That's non-negotiable. Would you be happy? Lucas paused. I think so. It's different from before. I'd be practicing law on my own terms, for clients I believe in. And I'd still have time for carpentry, for you, for the things that matter. Nina was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Then you should do it. You've been happier these past few months than I've seen you in years. You light up when you talk about the trial, about helping Evelyn. You found something you thought you'd lost. That's worth holding on to. You're sure? Dad, I'm 12, not 6. I can handle you having a job that sometimes requires late nights or early mornings. What I can't handle is you giving up something you love because you think you have to choose between me and your career. You don't. We can have both. We can build a life that includes both. Lucas reached across the table, took her hand. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. The next morning, Lucas called Evelyn and accepted her offer. They worked out the details over the following week. He'd handle Aquaverde's legal needs, take on select outside clients whose cases aligned with his values, maintain his carpentry and courthouse work for as long as he wanted. It was a hybrid practice that would have seemed impossible a few months ago, but now felt perfectly natural. The first few months were an adjustment. Lucas had to relearn how to balance multiple demands on his time, how to prioritize effectively, how to set boundaries so work didn't consume everything. But he had advantages he hadn't had 7 years ago. Clarity about his priorities, a daughter who kept him grounded, and clients he genuinely believed in. Word spread about the Meridian case, and Lucas started receiving inquiries from other entrepreneurs and small businesses facing similar situations. Corporations using legal intimidation to suppress competition, wealthy entities bullying individuals who couldn't afford prolonged litigation. Lucas was selective, taking only cases where he believed in the client and the cause. But when he did take a case, he gave it everything. He won some, lost others, but he never lost sight of why he was doing this. Every case was a chance to use law the way it was meant to be used, to protect people, to check abuses of power, to make things a little more fair. Sarah became his full-time partner, splitting her time between Aquaverde's legal department and the outside cases they took together. They developed an easy working relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. She was brilliant at research and organization. He was strong on courtroom work and strategy. Together, they were formidable. Benjamin Marsh, the retired court clerk, became an unofficial advisor. He'd stop by Lucas's home office occasionally, a converted garage space where Lucas kept his law books and case files alongside his carpentry tools. And they'd discuss cases, strategy, the peculiar challenges of maintaining ethical practice in a system that often rewarded the opposite. You're building something good here, Marsh told Lucas one afternoon, 6 months after the Meridian trial. A different kind of practice. I've seen a lot of lawyers in my 40 years at the courthouse. Most get consumed by the work or corrupted by the system. You found a third way. That's rare. I had good reasons to find it, Lucas said, thinking of Nina, of Ellen, of all the choices that had led him to this moment. The courthouse eventually hired a new janitor, but Lucas still stopped by occasionally to help with repairs. He'd grown to love carpentry. The meditative quality of working with his hands, the satisfaction of fixing broken things, the tangible proof of accomplishment when a door hung straight or a table stood level. He didn't want to give that up entirely. One Saturday morning, 8 months after the trial, Lucas was in his backyard building a treehouse for Nina. She'd mentioned wanting one casually, the way kids do when they don't really expect the idea to be taken seriously. But Lucas had taken it seriously. He'd spent weeks designing it, selecting materials, planning the construction. It was a weekend project that had turned into something more, a gift, a memory, a physical representation of being present. Nina sat on the grass below, reading a book, but occasionally looking up to watch him work. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of autumn day that felt like a gift after a long hot summer. "How much longer?" she called up. "Another hour, maybe? Want to come up and check the progress?" She climbed the ladder, settled onto the platform Lucas had built. It was spacious enough for her and friends, sturdy enough to last for years, detailed enough to show the care that went into its construction. "It's perfect, Dad," she said, running her hand along the railing. "Better than I imagined." That's the goal. Always build better than expected. Is that your philosophy for carpentry or for life? Lucas smiled. Both, I guess. They sat together in the half-finished treehouse, looking out over the backyard, the neighborhood, the life they'd built. Nina leaned against his shoulder, and Lucas felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Leaving law the first time, missing those years?" Lucas thought about that carefully. "No, I needed those years. We needed them. After your mom died, I was drowning. Work was the only thing I knew how to do, and I was doing it so much that I was losing you in the process. Walking away saved us. It gave me time to figure out what actually mattered. But you're a lawyer again now. On my terms. For the right reasons. That's the difference. Before I practiced law because it was what I was supposed to do, because I was good at it, because the money and prestige mattered. Now I practice because I want to, because it lets me help people, because I can do it without sacrificing what's important." He pulled her closer. "You're what's important, Nina. You always were. You always will be." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I'm glad you went back. Because you figured out how to have both. You don't have to choose anymore." They finished the treehouse that afternoon. Nina christened it by spending the first night sleeping up there, wrapped in blankets with a flashlight and a stack of books. Lucas checked on her before bed, found her happy and comfortable, already making the space her own. Standing in the backyard in the dark, looking up at the treehouse with its small light glowing, Lucas felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or simply the knowledge that he'd gotten it right this time. The anniversary of the Meridian verdict arrived in early December. Lucas marked the occasion by meeting Evelyn and Sarah for lunch at a small cafe near Aquaverde's offices. They'd stayed close, the three of them, bound by what they'd been through together. "I have news," Evelyn announced once they'd settled into their booth. "We just signed a deal to provide filtration systems to 500 communities across sub-Saharan Africa over the next 3 years. It's the largest contract in Aquaverde's history." "That's incredible," Sarah said. "Congratulations. It wouldn't have happened without you, either of you. If Meridian had won, if they'd taken my technology or forced me to sell, none of these communities would have access to clean water. You didn't just save my company, you saved lives, thousands of them, maybe more." Lucas felt the weight of that statement. He'd spent years defending corporations that hurt people, and he'd never fully forgiven himself for it. But now, sitting with Evelyn, knowing that his legal work had directly contributed to communities having clean water, he felt something shift. Not absolution. He'd never fully escape what he'd done before. But balance, maybe. A sense that the scales were evening out. "So what's next for you?" he asked Evelyn. "More of the same. Grow the company, expand access, keep innovating. What about you?" Lucas thought about the cases on his desk at home, the consultations scheduled for next week, the carpentry projects he was planning. "Keep doing what I'm doing. Help people who need it. Be there for my daughter. Build things that last." "Sounds perfect," Sarah said. And it was. Not perfect in the sense of flawless or easy, but perfect in the sense of right. Lucas had found a way to practice law that didn't consume him, to be a father without sacrificing his career, to use his talents for good without losing sight of what mattered. That evening, Lucas and Nina had their Friday tradition at Giuseppe's. They sat in their usual booth, ordered their usual pizza, fell into their usual comfortable conversation. "Dad, I've been thinking," Nina said between bites, "about next year, high school." "Already? You're still in 7th grade." "I know, but I want to talk about it, about what comes after." "Okay, what about it?" "I was thinking I might want to be a lawyer, like you, or maybe an engineer like Evelyn, someone who uses skills to help people. You and Evelyn showed me that's possible, that you can have a career that matters and still have a life." Lucas felt his throat tighten with emotion. You can be anything you want. Lawyer, engineer, astronaut, artist. Whatever makes you happy. I know. But I want it to be something that helps, something that matters. You taught me that. You and Mom both. Your mom would be so proud of you. She'd be proud of you too. For coming back, for standing up for Evelyn, for figuring out how to be both things, a dad and a lawyer who actually helps people. They finished dinner, drove home through streets Lucas had driven 1,000 times. His neighborhood, his community, his life. It was modest compared to what he could have had if he'd stayed on the corporate track 7 years ago. No corner office, no expensive car, no prestige or power. But it was real. It was his. It was enough. That night, after Nina went to bed, Lucas sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop. He pulled up the news article that had run about the Meridian case, reread it one more time. The headline called him the janitor who became a lawyer, It wasn't quite accurate. He'd always been a lawyer, just dormant, but he understood the appeal of the narrative. People loved underdog stories. They loved the idea that someone ordinary could stand up to power and win. What they didn't always understand was that standing up was the easy part. The hard part was staying stood up, day after day, when the cameras weren't there and the story wasn't exciting anymore. The hard part was building a life that honored your values even when no one was watching. Lucas closed the laptop, walked to Nina's room, checked on her one last time. She was asleep, peaceful, surrounded by books and the ordinary chaos of a 12-year-old's life. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe, feeling the familiar surge of love and terror and responsibility that came with being a parent. He thought about Ellen, about what she would say if she could see them now. She'd be proud, he thought. Not just of Nina, though Nina was remarkable, but of him too, for finding his way back without losing what he'd learned, for building something sustainable instead of just successful. In the morning, Lucas would wake up early and work on a brief for a new client, a small tech startup being sued by a larger competitor in what looked like another case of corporate intimidation disguised as intellectual property protection. He'd spend the afternoon in his garage workshop, finishing a custom bookshelf for the local library. He'd pick Nina up from school, help her with homework, make dinner, maintain the rhythms of daily life that kept them both grounded. It wasn't glamorous. It wouldn't make headlines. But it was good work, meaningful work, work that let him sleep at night. Lucas returned to the kitchen, washed his coffee cup, turned off the lights. Before heading to bed, he paused in the hallway, looking at the photos on the wall. Ellen smiling on their wedding day. Nina as a baby, a toddler, growing up. His law degree, framed and hung not prominently but present. The certificate from his carpentry training. Images of a life built piece by piece, choice by choice. He thought about the witness stand he'd repaired nearly a year ago, about the crack in the wood that had brought him to courtroom 6 on the morning everything changed. That crack was still there, visible if you looked closely, but strengthened by the repair. Not perfect, but solid, functional and honest. Life was like that, Lucas had learned, full of cracks and breaks and damage. The question wasn't how to avoid them. You couldn't. The question was what you did with them, whether you let them weaken you or whether you found a way to make them part of your strength. He'd chosen strength, chosen to rebuild rather than abandon, chosen to return to law but on his own terms, with his priorities clear and his values intact. Standing in his modest home, his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, his work waiting for him in the morning, Lucas felt something he'd spent 7 years searching for and finally found. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too fleeting, too dependent on circumstances. This was deeper, more enduring. Contentment, purpose, peace. The knowledge that he was building a life that mattered, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one person helped at a time. Justice, Lucas had learned, wasn't just argued in courtrooms. It wasn't just about winning cases or making headlines or defeating powerful opponents, though sometimes it was those things. More often, justice was quieter. It was showing up for your daughter's school events and also taking the call from a client who needed help. It was charging fair rates so people could actually afford representation and also making sure you earned enough to pay your bills. It was remembering why you became a lawyer in the first place and also remembering why you walked away. It was building a life that honored all the parts of yourself, the advocate and the craftsman, the fighter and the father, the person you were and the person you were still becoming. Lucas turned off the hall light, climbed the stairs to his bedroom, settled into bed with a book he wouldn't read because his mind was already planning tomorrow's work. But that was okay. He was tired in the good way, the way that came from spending your energy on things that mattered. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Families sleeping, lives being lived, ordinary people doing their best in a complicated world. Lucas had learned to be one of them, not the hotshot attorney or the struggling single father or the courthouse janitor, but all of those things and more. A person who'd found a way to integrate his past and present into something sustainable. He thought about Evelyn, about the communities using Aqua Verde technology, about clean water flowing in places where disease and death had once been constant threats. He thought about the other cases he'd taken, the people he'd helped, the small victories that might not make news but changed lives. He thought about Nina, growing up strong and kind and thoughtful, learning that it was possible to use your talents for good, that you didn't have to choose between success and values. And he thought about himself, about the journey from corporate lawyer to grieving widower, to carpenter, to courthouse janitor, to lawyer again, about all the versions of himself he'd been and how they'd led him to exactly where he was. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been straightforward, but it had been real, and it had been his, and in the end, that was what mattered. Lucas closed his eyes, feeling sleep creeping in, and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More clients who needed help. More cases to prepare. More carpentry projects to complete. More moments with his daughter to treasure. More chances to stand up for people who needed someone to stand with them. It would be hard work, good work. The kind of work that made a difference even when no one was watching. The kind of work worth waking up for. And as Lucas drifted off to sleep in his modest bedroom in his modest house, in his modest life, that was actually extraordinary in all the ways that counted, his last thought was simple and true. He'd found his way home. Not to a place, but to himself. To a life built on purpose rather than accident, on values rather than defaults, on presence rather than prestige. And that was victory enough. That was everything.